All right, so it's a little later in the week, but we've all been kind of busy. I had a whole birthday thing to do, and these guys have had school and work related stuff, so it is what it is. But it gave us time to watch, a glorious international shit show unveil itself for us at the G7, and, just, everything. I mean, it's all gone really quite bad, right?
Well, look at it this way:
My
if
mic
Putin
now
did end up,
working.
Yay!
Oh my god.
Yeah, you're with
I
us.
haven't used this thing in like so long and it's so terrible and I hate it so much.
Godspeed, sir. We'll have to find you a
Someday,
better one.
someday. This is the unfortunate bit, right? Like you buy a piece of equipment, right? And you hate it. And somehow that one piece of equipment that you absolutely hate lasts forever. It lasts longer than you've ever had any other piece of equipment. And you happen to be too cheap to replace it.
Oh, wow, that is a son of a bitch, isn't it?
It is. It is
I mean,
rather
this
unfortunate.
sounds a lot like a you problem, but I totally understand it
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would hope so.
because that's also a me problem.
It is. It is. It works. Luckily,
Oh
my
god, I had this
dishwasher.
this $20 piece of shit Dynex mic that lasted me like a fucking decade.
Yeah,
And
and,
it's the one that it doesn't go below 100 hertz, so you sound like you have no balls.
Good times.
uh,
It's like Minnie Mouse is
I,
screwing you in the background.
uh, well, I have not hit that corner of the internet, but I'll trust you on that one.
Oh, don't worry. Everything you could ever imagine is out there.
Oh,
Well, now that we've Rule 34 that one.
Yeah. Well, it's a problem that takes care of itself. It's a very self-resolving issue in our current date.
I don't know.
All
Are we
right.
gonna put it on a flag?
Oh, speaking of self-revolving issues, we were actually talking about this just before we came on the air. Something has happened in China involving nuclear power and radiation.
Actually, this is a
Oh,
good thing
that's
to bring Steve in
bullshit.
on.
That's bullshit. It's so okay. Right, I've been following this for a couple days, and I've seen a whole bunch of people overreacting to it. Basically, what ends up happening is so we got to talk a little bit about nuclear plant design in order to really
Well, before
understand
we get
this.
to that
So
point, for the
nuclear
scale
plant.
of things, they've admitted, quote, about five of the uranium rods have been damaged.
Okay, but again, it doesn't matter. It's like not a
Right.
significant issue, right?
Keep
So
going.
like the problem that you have every single time anything happens in a nuclear plant, the news gets to write about it because people are stupid and misinformed. And that's like I mean, it's like the Trump presidency, but they just attack something that they don't even bother to research. Right? Like the Trump presidency, they made shit up completely. This time they're just completely ignorant on the subject. So you got to understand something about nuclear reactors, and this is where like Gen 4, the proposed new reactors, we've debated them a couple times versus the current kind of standard run-of-the-mill how we build them. This is where they run into conflict because the stuff that we have has so many layers of safety built into it, and one of those things is your fuel rod assemblies. So the way a fuel rod assembly works is you have your fuel, which is actually just a handful of atoms and instead of being this giant green glowing rod like you see on The Simpsons, it's nothing like that. It's typically a yellow powder for uranium or something like that. But what we do in order to sit there and deal with this in order to prevent it from like boiling off or getting superheated is we embed the fuel into a ceramic pellet. The ceramic has a very low interaction cross section, so it doesn't really interfere with a nuclear reaction in any way, shape, or form. So we compress this into a pellet. And this is actually where a significant portion of all laboratories are doing their research. They're trying to find new atoms that they can stick in the fuel pellet and keep the fuel balance going, and they're always perpetually trying to run these reactors as long as possible, which is why we just recently hit a new world record for plant uptime of about 3 years because they're doing these experiments on fuel. So the reason it's a ceramic pellet is ceramic responds very well to high heats and high energy, and it's got those kinds of things. That's why we use it in our hair curlers, and that's why we use it in our brakes, right? That's what it's embedded in. Those fuel pellets are then put into a very thin walled steel pipe. essentially, or a little steel tube. And they stack all those fuel pellets in there, and then they seal the steel tube. What ends up happening is then those steel tubes are assembled. I think it's like 16 by 16 is the grid of these tubes with these fuel pellets with these rods, and it's all completely sealed. And the reason that they do this instead of giant pile of fuel is because if any one thing goes wrong, it's not a big deal. In this case, what ended up happening was a perfectly natural part of the reaction. Whenever you split uranium, you tend to get a lot of xenon and some of these other noble gases, which don't really do anything. They just kind of sit there and they build up. You basically, once you get the reactor up to full power, you typically burn these off just because of the neutron flux. So what ended up happening in this case is they didn't really build their little tubes very well because it's China, and Chinese stuff is still generally crap and doesn't meet your standard design tolerances. So where the United States used to have these kinds of leaks all the time, China has just started building nuclear reactors, and they really haven't put the QA/QC, Six Sigma spin on the whole entire thing. So what's ended up happening is these noble gases have built up in the fuel rod, and surprise, surprise, the fuel rods have a weak point, and when the weak point gets pressurized, it bursts. What ends up happening is some small amounts of the ceramic pellet, and some small amounts of the ceramic pellet, which includes the fuel and which includes some of the mixed fission products that you get outside of the fuel, has thus leaked into the reactor water. This, by the way, is completely normal in all reactors to a greater or lesser degree, right? It's not typically a big deal because you just swap out the fuel rod on the next fuel cycle. And anything that's in your primary coolant loop, you have a whole bunch of traps and stuff like that basically they're crud traps, right? So when you get the people who are going through and they're doing their plant maintenance, you have your workers come in, they go to the crud traps. That's the highest point of radioactivity that you get in the system. They do a survey on it, they find out that it's no big deal, and they drain it and clean it out. And that's what's going to happen the next time they refuel this reactor. It's not a big deal. But you have a whole bunch of people reacting to it because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. It really is, it's a very normal occurrence. It happens a lot less in US reactors because we spent the time, effort, and energy on our fuel assembles. Plus, we also use the same kind of tight tolerances on our shell and tube heat exchanger assemblies, which we use in every single form of steam generation facility that exists in the United States. And then all that technology is tied into making these very thin-walled vessels that don't crack under strain, pressure, or neutron flux. So that's really what it is. It's just, basically nuclear reactors doing what nuclear reactors doing, and China has a shitty, it's the Harbor Freight of fuel assemblies. That Chinesium just doesn't work out so well sometimes.
You see, that last bit there is the part that's kind of making me ready to hear about a meltdown in 3 weeks.
There's not going to be a meltdown.
The fact that they've built, I mean, it's not likely, but like the fact that they've built, it might be a French company, but it's a Chinese facility.
It would be so meltdowns first off require you to get all of the water evaporated. Right? All of the water in your coolant loop, all of the water. I mean, but in that period of time, all you have to do is keep the coolant flowing, and it still won't melt down. So this
is where like you're saying all these things that would obviously be done just about everywhere else.
Yeah.
But I'm really not holding my breath about it being done there.
I mean this isn't
China.
This is like it might be China, but you don't get a meltdown from this kind of problem. This is just a leak.
Yeah,
like
this is what we've been told. You see, that's what you've been told. That's what you've been told. And this was, what were we told in the beginning of January last year?
I understand, but
so like just saying.
There's a fundamental difference between the Chinese lying and saying it doesn't spread human to human. Meanwhile, they have a whole bunch of human to human cases, right? Which we all knew was bullshit at that time in January. And sitting there and saying, oh yeah, we have a small, noble gas leak, which is pretty normal for a nuclear reactor. But, it happens to be at a larger scale than anything else, and saying, oh yeah, well, that's going to cascade into a meltdown. Like, the two things are completely unrelated. It doesn't matter if you have a fuel rod leak. It won't lead to a meltdown. And even then, 3 weeks.
You're harping on me saying meltdown as if this is a concrete thing anymore. Now I was really suggesting a scale of damage.
I mean,
I would not be surprised if in 3 weeks there was a major catastrophe there. At the same time, I would also not be surprised if it was a complete nothing burger.
I will say that the process. So in order to have a meltdown, you have to have such a series of events occur, and they wouldn't be talking about it like they would be talking about a xenon leak. Like, I haven't seen any evidence that anybody who's familiar with the situation is like legitimately concerned. There's some people who are really concerned with their image, and I've seen that happen a couple times. Like, some guys like, oh my god, the French are shitting themselves, and no, it's not. They're liable because they built the shitty facility, right? They're liable because they aren't hitting their contract, right? And that they are the French company that the French, unlike the United States is incredibly stupid, and we've never exported any of our nuclear technology. We just gave it to China and said, have a nice day. But we didn't actually start selling the skill and labor and knowledge and understanding around the globe, but the French do. So the reason South Korea has a bunch of nuke plants, not North Korea, but the reason South Korea has a bunch of nuke plants is they hire the French to come build it for them, right? So if this company has fucked up so bad on its Chinesium reactor, that means that puts multi-billion-dollar contracts in other countries at risk. Which actually, as much as I complain about, where I work, part of the reason that we are so obscenely over the top in regards to safety is because it allows us to have access to countries and ports of entry. That's why the Navy does the insane level of rigor and criteria that we have. That's why all of our military tries to do the very best that they do all the time, to the point where they basically almost shoot themselves in the foot, right? You see this in the Army and the Marines and all the rest, because when you're acting on an international stage, where you fail matters. And right now the French are failing.
Yep.
Fair enough.
So, to round out the Chinese going on, you make sure, because I got like another 30 minutes here. I'm gonna dump into this little bit. These new little revelations that should have that were fucking obvious to everyone else who was paying attention, but now there's concrete data on it that makes things clearer. You remember that Dasick claimed that there were no bats being bred in the Wuhan lab facility. WHO said via his report, but also officially, that there are no bats being bred in that facility for research purposes at all. There are no bats being bred in the facility, period. Turns out that was a big fucking lie, because there's video evidence of them breeding bats in that facility.
Which we'll have that linked as well for anyone interested.
And then, of course, the fact that there was a study that was done, it's been published in Nature. No bats or pangolins are being traded in the wet market at the time of the initial outbreak, period.
Yeah, so
all the animal transmission theories from last year, all that shit they were saying, complete bullshit. All gone. All those theories are dead.
I think we can comfortably say, with the Fauci emails leak and release and all the other stuff, that was a coordinated effort to shut down a whole bunch of people looking at and making and basically calling. And I actually don't blame us for engaging in gain-of-function research. I don't understand why we ship that overseas to China. I see the value in it.
Well, because they don't give a fuck about human lives. I mean, they could have 1,000 raccoon cities and it would be just the same to them.
The thing is that we have the facilities here to study that and do that kind of research, and we put a ban on ourselves, and so we said, well, yeah, it's kind of important research. There's a risk
that something like this doesn't happen.
Yeah, right. But, I mean, again, we have the facilities to contain that risk, and I don't understand why we said,
the point was that
let's not do it at the CDC lab, which is the best in the world. Let's go do it over in China.
Well, the idea was that we were never going to do that in the first place. We were never going. The idea of the ban was that no federal dollars, there was supposed to be a complete moratorium on it across the board at the government level. This was not supposed to be allowed to happen in such a way that we were able to fund indirectly the research in somewhere else. Well, that was never the intent. Like they relaxed that rule.
They did back off that ban, though, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. That was the problem. They decided that they were going to half-ass it,
yes.
even with the same exact risk analysis backing the decision.
Well,
The whole point of it was to never let it happen anywhere because it was a global impact. It wasn't a fucking local impact.
and
We
again,
do have the facilities here to contain and mitigate, but the
yes.
point was that even with that risk, there was still the possibility of the contamination spreading out beyond the borders of facilities that were going to be involved. And
that's always
that
true.
became greater than the background risk that was acceptable, thus the funding pause.
I mean, you can't estimate a risk on an event that hasn't happened in the United States,
Well,
right?
it's a black swan risk, which is great in finance because you can just fucking ignore it, but it's not good in health and safety.
I got it, and I disagree with that. Like, we shouldn't limit our research because there's a risk it might go bad, right? Like, I just don't, you know.
So the point is,
a black swan event could also be the creation of a micro black hole due to the DLHC,
yeah, sure.
and something
but
goes down. That's a black swan. That's a real possibility.
Yeah,
that doesn't
Steve,
mean we shouldn't
you're missing
smash
something
atoms
here.
together.
You're missing something here. If it was factually the case that it was possible to create them in the LHC, then it would, by definition, require that it is happening thousands of times per second above your head in the atmosphere. So the whole point of that discussion became moot the moment that you could prove that it would happen, because that would mean it was already happening at far greater energy levels.
Like according to theoretical physics, that is happening all the time.
Well,
they just evaporate.
Well, no, that's not the case. It's either it's that it could be happening, but we don't know because we don't have good enough data to make that prediction.
Well, it's more like we can't
but
measure
it is
them
a possibility.
they only last for microseconds.
Well, the thing is, we potentially could, but we don't have the means to really do that yet.
I mean,
the muon coupling, the G-2 experiment is a good example of the sensitivity discrepancy between things that we might be looking for, and it's a bad allegory here, but it's relevant. Yes. And that electron versus muon, the ability to see the disturbance between the quote classical quantum description of a coupling of two versus the anomalous coupling, going out 13 digits there. It's really only strongly relevant with the muon because there's an anomalous behavior that's outside the standard model. That's largely probably going to be due to the fact that it's much more massive. So again, bad allegory.
These are all black swan events. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't.
But no, that's not a black swan event because it's not A. It's not unpredictable, and B. There's the kind of black swan event we're talking about here is if it's not already happening, like constantly all the time.
Again, though, right? Like the the probability of a bad event happening is still there. It's just it hasn't happened yet.
So
right,
like the point being here that
you can't turn around and say, "Oh yeah."
It's because of something that you do. That's the issue here. That's at hand. If in the LHC you could produce black holes, they'd already be happening all the time anyway, and they would be moot because it's not mitigatable by not doing something.
And again, we can produce black holes based on the energies that we're using, which was why the whole point was brought up in the first place.
But again,
so we can be doing it. Even if we just haven't observed the risk occur.
Point being here, even if you didn't run the LHC, it would be happening all the time anyway, and there would be no point in not running the LHC. But if you're talking about gain of function research, the point here is that gain of function is not something that happens in nature. As just a general thing, like the probability of the kind of event that is unfolding from a natural interaction is so much less than what would happen at a research
gain
facility.
Of function,
just based on our knowledge of infections that happen to
gain
research
of function
laboratory,
research. So just to go over it real quick. Gain of function research is an attempt to accelerate the evolution of viruses to find out what could happen
Well,
if they infect
to
a
make
human
them
host.
to make them capable of infecting hosts they would otherwise not be capable of
Well,
infecting.
and to study the evolution and the potential
Yes.
ramifications and develop countermeasures.
So,
all of which
so basically
is
you can
all
add
of
the function
which,
to it.
right, and then you can also develop the
Okay.
countermeasures. That's the key portion.
Yes. Well, the
right?
point is to be able to make vaccines, like say for
Yeah,
a
that's the
horseshoe bat
stated
colony
goal,
that's
as it
1,000
were.
miles north.
I mean, and again, I think that's this goes back to like cloning and stem cells and bioethics.
Sure.
Bioethics is a complicated mess, but
Yeah.
I feel that the value in performing the research that would identify viruses and what could happen so that we can develop countermeasures in advance and have them ready to go is very valuable. In fact, one of the this is not the last one that I think we did something like that on, where we actually saw the gain, was the Ebola outbreak back in 2014, 15, something like that. That was happening over in Africa, and we were able to stop that in its tracks specifically because similar type research had been done, so we'd already had vaccines and antivirals that were ready to combat it. They were in training and process, but that's how we were able to end that pandemic, is by doing research that's similar to this.
We brought three cases of Ebola back to the U.S. to treat. There were very experimental therapies, and convalescent plasma therapy was one of the therapies implemented, besides coming up with a vaccine for people going back over, which was largely based off of spinning down antibodies from other people who were already infected. So, unfortunately, it was not that was not largely driven by gain of function. It was understood better by gain of function.
But again, I'm not saying that it was driven by that, but we did gain advantage in that process for the drugs that we used to treat it, as well as the preventative measures that we used to give to the people who were going over to deal with the problem. We were able to stop it because we did similar types of research. And the key is...
we didn't do gain of function for that. That's kind of the point. It was with Ebola, sure.
It was very, very similar to gain of function. I will give you that but you're splitting hairs, right? Again, at the end of the day, the key difference between the Ebola outbreak that never happened because we did that research and the COVID outbreak.
Well, it didn't happen because we kept 3 people inside sealed bags until they got in the middle of a BSL-4.
That's
unlike
part
just
of it.
Having the New Jersey Port Authority, go up and give them a big hug because they've been on a death ship for months.
I don't think it's because we did this one specific thing. I think it's because we sat there and handled it with our resources at the CDC, rather than relying on China to try to produce something equivalent.
Again, point being here, to get to this, is that for gain of function research, the idea is to get the virus to gain function in a new host.
Yes.
So to get the ability to infect a new host, so that you can develop the vaccines required for that host, and so that you can potentially look into therapies that might be used to mitigate an outbreak by that kind of function presenting in a natural virus.
Yeah, sure.
The thing is,
full spectrum investigation, of course.
The thing is that this kind of work has the potential to do things that are not possible realistically in nature at anywhere near the speed or time frame that you can do it in the lab. Well, it's taking some of the nastier viruses or things that can't infect a given host, and then making it possible for them to infect those hosts.
Well, I think I understand your point, actually, and where you're going with that. And I'd like to actually weigh in on this myself for just a quick second. Because I really do understand both points, and I stand by kind of both of them to a degree. You see, I do like gain-of-function research, but I like logical and reasonable gain-of-function research. What's going on with this COVID-19 monstrosity is that we're looking at something that's probably some sort of horrifying chimera, not a reasonable jump.
There's also the possibility that it was engineered as a bioweapon.
Also,
right?
yes.
I would not...
That is not an unreasonable conclusion.
That is not.
It's not an unreasonable possibility. But like, I would say that this looks a lot more like it was a fuck up by a research lab than it was
Yeah, it feels
a
like an escaped
bioweapon
experiment
test.
as opposed to an escaped weapon.
Right.
It's possible, but we also do know that China has had
Well,
some
look,
attempts to research
this is like
various
Iran and their
biological
nuclear power,
targets
though.
that target various
Yeah,
people based
absolutely.
on their genome,
So
right?
this is like
So
Iran
they're
and nuclear
doing this
power, though,
kind of
because
shit.
think of it like this: if we had a hostile foreign nation that was doing legitimate research into nuclear reactors,
Yep.
but they had in the past said shit that made you think they want to bomb you, would it not be reasonable to be suspicious of their activities in
Well,
the war framing?
that's
But
exactly
also,
correct.
but it's also entirely possible they could just be legitimately looking into nuclear energy.
And I got it, but again,
Right.
so the
So
solutions, the
that's kind of where
solution,
it looks.
and the solution there, and this is the point that I was trying to make earlier, is not to sit there and necessarily deny them nuclear technology in that case,
Right.
but to sit there and provide it in a safe and effective manner
But
to
now,
them.
suppose
Well, that
that
also requires oversight.
Right,
but
exactly.
here also
And
also suppose this though. Suppose that it's not. Suppose that radiation shielding were impossible, or suppose that it was only effective, um, if you had like say an impracticable amount of lead shielding you had to put in.
for what?
Say you needed a million times the volume instead of 1,000 times the volume for containment. Just saying that they're like the point
Just
here is that
theoretically.
I mean,
the idea that I'm trying to get across here is that like radiation we know how to deal with. It's not something that it's not
well,
something. So basically, the whole point of getting rid of the gain of function research funding is to prevent the possibility of another Brave New World scenario like the
and
introduction of nuclear weapons.
this is
We
something
don't
that
want to provide gain of function that way.
this is something that I firmly disagree with the left on. I believe that dangerous technologies should be researched, but they should be
Right.
researched by by an authority that we trust. The problem that I have is not gain of function research. The problem that I have is that we gave funding to China to do it. If we did it at our CDC, I am fully confident that we could have contained this without a problem. If we hand
That
all
was the
that
thing
shit over to
is
China and we fund them to do it over there, I have zero confidence that China can contain it or will contain it because I
right.
don't think they have the same safety posture we do.
So what I see is that what is possible here is that we had elements within the bureaucracy of the healthcare research wing of things that didn't give a shit about the safety issues and found a loophole to get their way anyway, even though it was still stupidly dangerous to do.
Well,
That's
again,
that's that's what it looks like from the outside. It looks like Dasick found a way to get
I
his ass the money so that he could still do the work he was already involved in before
I
somewhere else.
I agree that does appear to be what this is, and
Regardless of the extent of the
that's
safety, like regardless of whether or not you agree with the way it was described to get the ban in place in the first place.
no,
The
no, no.
fact
I
of the
mean,
matter is he found a
I'm
way to get
saying,
money to a facility that would do the research
and
anyway.
and that's absolutely true. But here's the counterpoint: if we had actually not banned it in the first place, he would have done his research here,
And
right?
it's
Like
possible. So
that's
the
the
thing
problem.
is, it's also possible that had he done this, like we could have had the research done here and had COVID start here.
So yes, but again, if we had COVID,
Yeah,
if we had the research here and COVID started here, we would have been able to contain it better than China.
much more
I
likely.
mean,
Well, much more likely
China
we could have contained
China
it.
was doing stuff like banning internal domestic flights while encouraging international travel. I mean,
Which is where I
they
say
were
that I
they
think they
were
learned the wrong lessons.
actively they were
Go ahead.
actively attempting to spread it,
Oh,
right? Like
undoubtedly.
once
Yeah,
it once
this
it
is
happened, they had
yeah.
no interest in containment, whereas I think the U.S. would. We would eat
Again,
shit
I
for
think
it
they
for a
learned the wrong
while.
lessons from SARS and MERS. They definitely learned the wrong lessons. This being one of them. And again, it was more of a matter of more of a matter of when than if for the next pandemic outbreak, especially one that would start from in China, like say SARS and MERS. They just learned the wrong lessons from the previous outbreaks, pandemics, and implemented their strategies they learned from them, namely that they would not share the information and encourage people to leave the country. so that they could kick off their Chinese Century initiative, which
Right,
is
and
still
that's
getting fucked up because of their incompetence.
which again is why, like, this is one of the issues that I have with United States policy is we have a tendency to take these controversial research methods. The left will sit there and claim some sort of safety victory for the populace at home, and then simultaneously the similar people who are pushing that will sit there and set the agenda overseas, which A, enriches China with our technology that we're funding, while B, at the same time putting us at greater risk because they do not have the world's best interest at heart. And that's a serious problem where we are actually offloading our research and our technology to hostile nations because it's easier to get it done than it is to get it done here.
Let me give you a corollary here, which again is not going to be a great fit for it. But you'll notice that the United States is not doing significant chemical weapons research right now. There's a moratorium on that.
Let me
Yeah, we haven't been for some while. At least openly.
Let's be very clear. Overt. Overt is
like I said,
it's
significant is a weasel word I placed in there for myself. You can call me on that as you will, but significant, like, overt chemical weapons research is not happening because it's stupid dangerous. And the overt part, obviously, we don't want our hostile foreign adversaries to be doing the same shit, but you get the idea.
Well, the thing
here.
about that is, it's the same as the gain-of-function research.
Weapons.
We basically have to know what sort of weapons can be developed so that we can defend against them.
Right.
Sad as that state of affairs is, it is a constant arms race, and it's just something we have to do.
Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why, even though we, through our vaccines and various technologies, eradicated smallpox, there was significant pushback in the scientific community about basically launching it into the sun and destroying the very last known culture forever.
Right. That's
because
why we
if
have
somebody had it, right, if somebody sat there and had it, and had manipulated it, we would have no defense against it.
Right.
Yeah, it would have to be built up from the ground up. So it's one of
those.
There
are 4 samples left in the facility near Boston.
And that is again.
That's a
this goes back
BSL-4
to
lab.
Why do I sit there and believe that gain-of-function research should be done by the United States? It's that kind of stuff. We do need to do this kind of research. We just, I don't trust China to do it. And I think that if we did it here, yes, the pandemic could start here. The risks are on the United States, but the United States will handle those risks better.
We've got a known better track record, period.
We have a known
straight out
exactly.
of the gate.
Exactly.
But
right.
again,
so should we deny the research that could save millions or billions of lives?
Well, here's
Or-
another thought.
Gimp us because maybe we might be safer in the future.
Are we currently looking at how to make bigger and better conventional fission bombs?
Yes.
Well, yeah, there you go.
we absolutely are.
And we're
But
stuck in that arms race, aren't we?
Well,
And
first,
what country is looking to make 1,300 more of those?
China.
But
But we aren't doing it. We aren't doing it as part of an arms race. We fund that as part of our research, right?
The point is, but it is an arms race.
I don't think it's really not an arms race. When
It's not a stockpile issue, right? It's not a stockpile issue anymore. It's an effectiveness issue.
Yes. So the research.
The same thing is. Yeah, go ahead.
When we do weapons research, it is in one of two categories: making the biggest boom possible, and simultaneously making the smallest boom possible. Those are really kind of the two variants. I mean, that's the biggest boom.
Right.
How much?
Well, let me rephrase it.
How efficient of a boom can we make? Yes.
How many rounds of boom can we make, and then how can we use that most effectively?
Yes. And so like, I've worked with people who actually handled suitcase nukes. I've worked with people who have seen the big old honking ones. I have, worked at, back when I was in the Boy Scouts, I stayed at some of our missile facilities, and apparently it's like a 12-hour shift, and 3 or 4 of those hours is transitioning through security to get into the bunker.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Although I'm glad to hear that, even if the codes were 00000. At least it was hard to get to the place where you entered all zeros.
So my understanding, they described it to us when we were out at We were out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We stayed at the military base there, which does do our nuclear warheads. And one of the guys sat there and explained the security protocol, and it takes about 3 hours to get in and 3 hours to get out. And so like you start your shift, and there's overlap, so there's like constantly people flowing in, but it's, you know, you have to take the elevator down, you have to enter your code, you have to wait for the giant, you know, massive steel door to open, you have to wait for the massive steel door to close, then you got the next one, then you got to go through 3 security checkpoints, and by the time you're done, it's like a 1.5 to 3 hour process to get through everything. And then you can take your post, you operate for 6 hours, and then you got a 3 hour walk back.
Phew. You'd think the way out wouldn't be as hard. But then
Well,
again,
I mean,
guess they've got to check you for any kind of intel or anything that they wouldn't want to get out of there.
Well, it's not just that, right? Like, if you're trying to get in, your access to those missiles is always going to be the shortest route of entry. So they're just going to have the people go out the same way they come in, right? Because then you have all those same security protocols.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, it's nothing to
like,
double up into either.
We're not going to have, oh yeah, here's the exit door. I know that we took 3 hours to get you in, but hey, see that sign over there? Go on. That little steel door takes you right outside. So it'll still be 3 hours each way, because they have to, and it's a lot of it's like bunker doors and ceiling and stuff like that. Like, for those who watch Stargate, every once in a while they'd have a scene from Cheyenne Mountain where they closed those big old blast doors, and they don't move all that fast.
No, those really don't.
Also really fucking heavy.
Yep, and the same kind of stuff is what we use to protect our silos. So, like, and the idea is basically that if an attack team decided to go after our nuclear warheads, right? They can go through this process, but if it's voluntary, it takes 3 hours to get in. If it's not voluntary, you have the entire time to arrange the U.S. military support to that entrance. Right? Like, that's the idea.
Well, speaking of the entire U.S. military, we could pivot to the current commander-in-chief of it.
Oh, really?
You mean the skin suit?
As Evan was telling me about the current resident-in-chief.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's at the G7.
So
yeah.
So I was listening to Tim Pool on this earlier today, and he goes, you know, the G7 is going terrible, right? It is humiliating.
Yeah.
It is humiliating. We clearly put somebody up there who's completely incapable of doing the job.
We being, you know, tech oligarchs, very rich people, and in the intelligence community. But yeah, continue.
Come on, your vote counted.
You wanna talk about TDS, and like a perfect example of how you know that TDS was really a problem? It's him going up there, and now that he's on the world stage, and everybody can watch him in all of his, you know, bumbling, fumbling, you know, dementia glory. Now the left is sitting there and going, "This is what Republicans secretly wanted all along." Now, Tim Pool comes out and he says, I don't want this all the time. And there's nobody who wants him to be like that. And I actually disagree. I firmly believe that the President of the United States is strong. And it is a shame if that happens, right? So I don't want to see the President of the United States be weak. But I am really glad that it's on full display, right? That the media covered for this.
Yeah,
and that the Democrats covered for this. Because this is the only way we're going to get people to not, you know.
Yeah, people have to realize how bad it is.
Yep.
That's it. They have to see it for themselves, and if they don't, then they aren't genuinely going to be able to appreciate it. That being said, I will link a link to a site, Becker News. It's up actually in links from day before yesterday. If you want to scroll up, but it's got a video of Biden just wandering into a group of reporters and just kind of looking around and not really even knowing where he is. It was in his English portion of his trip while he was still visiting the Queen, who he said reminded of his mother. Speaking of his mother, I remember Mr. Putin saying that he mentioned that his mother said some things to him. He said this to Vladimir Putin. that his mother told him some things.
I
Oh,
I think
that's interesting.
That's
I
What
th-
does
that's
she have to
great.
say?
this is the perfect example of Schadenfreude is watching Biden get up on the international stage, right?
It's something. It's really something.
I mean, all we can do, we've had what 3 or 4 weeks of the news media having to eat shit on all of the lies that they told during the last during Trump's term, right? And it's been constant, nonstop.
Yeah, we've got the
And now
knocked out of the park on the hydroxychloroquine.
yeah.
That one's just
Well,
that's out now. Nobody's talking about
so
it, but that's out.
so I want to caution you there, because I read the study. Their sample size was all of 255 people.
Fair
It's
enough.
not it's not particularly robust.
That
Their
being said,
results,
our anecdotal evidence is pretty good based on what was done in
I
the field. But I am with you. I would like to see more of the numbers from what was done in the field brought back
as
and
as I
actually
have mentioned many times, I
put
don't
down.
accept anecdotal evidence. I just can't. Anecdotal evidence is wrong all
Well,
the time.
you work for the government in a nuclear lab, so that's fine.
That's also true. Yeah. My I, if it doesn't work, I can't
Well, look,
publish it.
the evidence from the field is going to be pretty straightforward. It's going to be what medicine was given, what were the test results that prove whether or not it's doing anything useful.
I
It's
mean,
not
yeah,
going to
once
be
all the numbers
how
are
does your
in,
hand feel today.
we're gonna know a lot.
And I will say, right, so I know somebody at work who also is in the same boat with me. He had COVID. His whole family had COVID. It was a few weeks ago that they were out with COVID, and his son was having the worst of it. He and his wife, like, it wasn't a big deal, minor cold. A
Uh,
little bit weird because they couldn't smell and taste things. That's what he was saying. But
right.
their son actually had a fairly bad case, and the doctor was prescribing him hydroxychloroquine and zinc.
Good.
So from what I am hearing, and this is actually not it's not the first time I've heard it. It seems that the medical community as a whole is using the hydroxychloroquine and zinc protocol,
You're damn
uh,
right.
regardless of whether or not the news media is reporting it.
So the problem is that's not entirely true. The
I,
doctors that know what the fuck they're doing are using it, whereas a lot of
Fair, yeah.
where there are still holdouts in administrative staff that had full blown TDS last year
yep.
that to this day still don't think it's worth using and insist that it is only being used because Trump said to use it,
I
regardless of the data that is presented to their fucking faces. And every
I
single
mean
one of
that's
those assholes are responsible for deaths now because of that. It's
Yeah.
that
disgusting.
is
Yeah, you could absolutely say
And
there's blood on their hands.
I know this shit happens.
yeah, and I'm not.
Can't say how I know this kind of thing, but like from multiple different sources and points of reference, I know this shit's going on, and it's really disgusting.
I'm really curious. How did the left get so hardcore into TDS? That's what I'm trying to. That's what I can't figure out.
Well,
Right?
actually,
Like
I can give you a really quick answer on that. They believe the media, and the media is owned by
but
people that very much dislike Donald Trump
I mean, I
or came
understand
to
that
dislike him.
idea, but there's a certain level of cognitive dissonance that should have set in.
And that's called
And
doublethink.
Yeah, but you see, you gotta recognize here, Steve, that the human mind can only even if you have a very advanced one, the human mind can only handle so much information processing at once. And if you continually bombard it with new bullshit, they're not going to process their cognitive dissonance. They're not going to try to get rid of that disruptive annoyance in the back of their head.
I
And
mean,
so
I get.
if you just direct that feeling at a focal point and say Donald Trump's the reason why you feel like you're going crazy, then if you say it often and loud enough, they're gonna just go with it.
I mean, I have heard those kinds of arguments before.
But
But at the
that's not
same
all
time,
people. So
I guess the struggle point for me
yeah,
is, again, and this is partially who I am and how I've been and why I do well where I'm at. I do not understand being in a state of cognitive dissonance because I find it physically and I find it psychologically painful. I actually find I get physically sick if I'm in it. So I don't stay in.
That means
It
you're a
is.
functional human being.
Well, it also means he has
everybody's
autism.
supposed to. Yeah,
Possibly. Well, that's the thing. I mean,
it's a trait that it's a trait I can share. It's a hyperfocus on a frustration.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's a hyperfocus on the frustration. It's just that if you're in cognitive dissonance, that means that logically the world doesn't work,
right?
And it's painful to try to sit there and hold two.
The physical manifestation of it is the hyperfocus part.
That may be true.
So, and I speaking from experience, I get that too.
I mean, it makes us good engineers, but like, I don't understand. I know. So, you go back to psychology, and there's a couple things that you can walk away with, and it's the dangerous portions of psychology, as far as I'm concerned. Right? What we know about the human mind is we know that an individual will go along with the group 75% of the time. Yeah. And it's not an individual goes along with a group 75% of the time. It's more like 75% of individuals go along with a group 100% of the time.
Right. Yeah, that's a better way to say it.
Yes. So we know that to be true. And so I can kind of understand the idea of, 75% of the population goes along with the group. But the other side of that is that even when they're going along with the group, they know it's wrong. Right. And so,
or at least some portion thereof.
Right. So when you start talking about the line experiment where they would put 3 lines up and they'd had to figure out which one they answered.
Reference that one.
Right. It's also known as the Millikan experiment.
Well, a real quick TLDR for folks that aren't going to be familiar, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the Millikan experiment is one of the things that you'll get in Psych 101. Basically, so a lot of this evolved out of, like, how do we handle and deal with the Holocaust is really what it came out of, right? So the horrors associated with the Holocaust were so profound, regardless of what the numbers that people may quibble over. The horrors that we actually saw, that we have in photographic evidence, are so, like, astounding that to turn around and assume that every German is somehow an evil person, or even anybody who was part of the Nazi party was an evil person, is just unconscionable, right? You can't find just a nexus of evil.
Moreover, if you look at pictures of them, they're just like pictures of the Germans at the time. A lot of them are just like, them enjoying life as a normal person would.
Right.
Next to the place where they're burning all the bodies.
Right. And so the question came up of, are we to assume that Germans are just inherently evil and we should genocide them, or is there some sort of psychological thing at work? And this is one of the first times that psychology was attempting to really, like, dig in and act as a science, right? There's a period of time from about the 1930s to about 1970 where psychology did a lot of really good research. Like, they did legitimately good research. The stuff that came out of that period was fantastic, but it violates every Milgram, sorry.
Yeah.
Milligan must be the oil drop experiment.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I was wondering why it sounded familiar, but it wasn't quite there. I'll put a link for everybody that's... Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about now, actually.
So the shorter, saner version is the lion experiment, because that one at least doesn't have people torturing people.
Well, no, that was separate. That was the guy torturing people was separate. But the point of the research at the time was produce stuff like the Zimbardo experiment, which is false. And a lot of these other things that go into was basically they wanted to see is how can you convince people to do terrible things? Can you convince people to follow stupid things?
I mean, aside from their conscious mind saying yes, obviously, this basically said, oh yes, most certainly you can.
And so what they did was the Milgram experiment or whatever it is. What he did in this case was his hypothesis was that individuals engage in conforming behavior. Right? That was his hypothesis. And to test the hypothesis, what he did was he put about 30 people into a room. 29 of them were in on the study. And one of them was basically the person that the study was based on. And so he would start the study with a series of I think it was like 10 questions or something like that, where he'd post 3 lines on the board and he'd label them A, B, C, and then he'd have a third line that was displayed, and you had to determine which line the D line most closely matched, right? Or the third line on the thing most closely matched. So for the first like 6 or 7 of these, he would go down the line of the Confederates, which are not like the Confederacy, but the people who are actively engaged in the study and aren't part of it. So he'd go to the Confederates and he'd ask them, and in sequence, each one would name the correct line of the set. But by the time he got to like 6 or 7, he all of a sudden started changing it. So the Confederates, he'd give a signal to the Confederates, and the first Confederate would choose the wrong answer. And the second Confederate would do the same thing, and so on and so forth until it got to the 30th person.
So so that the experiment would elevate and escalate more than it might otherwise.
No.
Just to clarify.
No, different experiment. So it just goes down the line where every single person answers the exact same answer that is wrong, and then it tests the actual person who's part of the subject experiment. Yeah. And what this experiment found was that in 75% of cases, the individual who was the subject of the experiment, the 30th individual, after hearing 29 wrong answers, would turn around and reply with the exact same answer as the other 29. No, and only 25% of experimental participants would give the right answer, regardless of whether of the other 29.
I should expand on this a little bit. This has been tested with other variations in terms of the number of people that are involved, the number of Confederates, and the statistic holds pretty much. Yes. And moreover, you're also thinking of so when people talk about the Milgram experiment, by the way, you should be clear about this. And this is why I said it's better to call it the line experiment. The Milgram experiment, most people think of, is the Milgram shock experiments.
Yes, which
is the more important one.
Okay, I'm not entirely familiar with the line experiment, but if that's
the line experiment is just basically saying
put that one as well.
It's drawing 3 lines on a board. It's nothing. It's not shocking people.
Right.
It's just conformity, not obedience.
So after I think he did the same too, or it's some other guy. I don't know. I haven't looked at psych in a long time. The second major experiment that came out of this research after they had this like shocking result that people will conform even to incorrect answers, which by the way is largely why they are going after with the critical race theory stuff, even though it's blatantly wrong. Most of the kids in the school will repeat it just because.
Here we go. I found an excellent link for that I'll include for everybody. That's
so. The second experiment that was very significant was the shock experiment, and in this case, they would have just a single. They would have the person providing instruction, who was the research associate. They'd have a Confederate on the other side that the individual could not see, and then a dial in front of them with some numbers. Basically, the attendant for the experiment would provide the instruction to flip a switch, and he would go down the line, and it would basically be something like 1 volt, 2 volts, 10 volts, blah blah blah, to 1,000 volts. And so, what the participant in the study was told was that he was shocking the individual on the other side. That was what was going to happen, and it was going to be.
They're also told that they're a bad person.
That wasn't actually necessary for the experiment.
It depends on. Okay, so there are several replicates and other studies, but the general idea was that could you get someone to continue harming someone beyond the bounds of the rules they were given? Would they obey? What set of rules would they obey? And would they feel empathy for someone, whether or not they thought that they were a bad person who was deserving the punishment they were given?
That was a separate experiment. In this case, that
was a different
one. Like I said, replicates and repeats.
This was just the authority experiment, and the authority experiment was much more significant because, again, what would happen is they would go down the line and they'd provide these shocks, and so the other person on the other side would scream. They're not actually getting shocked. They just scream every single time a light flashed in their box, because that's all it really technically did. So the guy who was technically giving the shocks didn't know they weren't real shocks. And the first couple times it was funny, right? Like he just followed as soon as the authority happened. And then they got into the higher and higher levels of shocks where they started to get very, very concerned because the pain that the actor was expressing was supposed to get worse and worse, and cussing and all this other stuff. And the authority figure is only their guidance was all you can say is flip the next switch or something to that effect. And what they found is that everyone, only about, or well, I shouldn't say everyone, 75% of people will keep flipping switches. There will come a point where they actually sat there and they just had the individual no longer respond on the other side, and they would still continue to flip switches. So what they ended up observing, and they weren't allowed to force them, they weren't allowed to berate them, all they could do is say flip the next switch, and they would do it every single time. And the findings from the experiment were such that people would actually have like mental breakdowns in front of it, and they'd protest, and they'd even say no, but then they'd flip the switch anyways. And this was the obedience and the authority experiment. So basically, the combined findings of the line experiment and the obedience and authority experiment is you can get good people to do bad things because they follow what they're told. And only about 25% of people will stand up and say no when it violates their moral rationale or violates their cultural norms. And those people get shot.
The good thing is, though, in general, that 25% of people will snap out of it, so to speak.
The downside to that, though, is that 25% of people get shot in the authoritarian regimes.
Right.
So that's why you avoid being in said regimes, point one. And point two, if you find yourself in a daunting place, go ahead and prepare yourself, as I've closed out basically every show I've ever done, to, just be wary of the world in which you find yourself and be prepared to defend your home and the ones you love.
So it's a Darwinian selection pressure on who gets to flip the switch, when if you refuse to flip the switch, you become the guy in the box.
Right. And that's kind of the...
Which should have helped explain to you several of the 5 million other people who were killed in the Holocaust besides the Jews.
Yes, but
or we can always fall back to the really excellent analogy of democracy is two wolves and two sheep and a wolf deciding who gets to have what for lunch, and a republic is one of those sheep has guns. So that's that dividing line.
And this is the weird part too, because when we start talking about TDS, it would make sense if there was an authority figure telling them that they were to flip a switch.
You mean like on every single TV?
I struggle to believe that people take the TV seriously, right? Like
that's because you have cognitive dissonance.
Well, you're also probably raised to laugh at them instead of sit there and stare at them as if they're the authority of all things.
Yeah, they're not meant to be your modern-day God, preaching down to you from upon high.
I guess that's the thing, right?
So you have to draw that particular distinction, and with that particular distinction...
Not everybody's told growing up that these news people are just humans like you and me, and they're not the ones out there figuring out this stuff for themselves.
Well, I mean, I'll give you guys a really excellent example.
But I mean, even if you take that, right? Even if you say, okay, fine, the news is what's telling them to do that. How did the news get that way? Like
their parents told them that the news was always correct, and when you're raised in a culture,
I mean, like the journalists. How did the journalists fall into line like that? Because
that's just the way it's always been. It's not, but in their frame of reference, that's the way it's always been. And they're basically all followers, largely. I mean, you look at the ones that aren't, and then you get things like some personalities at Newsmax. You get things like National File. You get, again, some personalities at something like the Daily Caller. You get people like Tim Pool, who would otherwise be like pretty much a far lefty guy who has really become kind of a centrist. A bit of a fence sitter, but a centrist nonetheless, as opposed to a legitimately lefty dude.
He sits on the fence as much as he used to.
He doesn't.
Like,
he doesn't.
If you look at where Tim Pool's webcasts were a year ago, and you compare them to today, he is not the milquetoast fence sitter anymore.
No, by comparison, yeah. I mean, he's gone from being just some plain old Jane lefty to
beanie's on too tight.
Probably. It probably is.
I mean, I don't always fall in line with the the right's worldview that everything's going to shit. Plus, I also hate the right because they don't ever do anything about what they complain is a problem. Same issue I have with any other form of activist. Oh man, I'm cleaning my desk for the first time since I did my taxes,
Oh,
and I'm
wow.
finding like money and cards and stuff like that because taxes were due right around my birthday.
No. Well, that's actually kind of cool.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, nice.
Sorry about that. Oh, I gotta go deposit that check. All right. Yes.
Oh, well, good
But
night
yeah,
all around then.
I mean, it does piss me off that the right doesn't do anything, and they haven't done anything. Like, that was the good part about Donald Trump, but then he stopped being Donald Trump towards the end.
Thanks, Jared.
Is that who did it?
Amongst others. But yes, I personally lay a fair bit of blame at his feet.
Let's just say that, to the extent I'll agree on that one, the reason why we still have vaccines being produced in Baltimore, even though they fucked up 75 million doses by now.
Did they fuck up 75 million?
Yeah, you remember that original 15? They quadrupled it the next time.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, that was just recent. The 60 million doses had to be chucked because they fucked it up again.
Ah, that's fantastic.
Oh, I just read
so
about
supposedly,
that. Wow, so that was that same laboratory.
Supposedly, well, same production facility. Supposedly that the contract that locked it in was one of the ones that Jared Kushner put through, which is just like that's so fucking fantastic. Because I have to tell you, at this point, I don't understand how breach of contract is any more expensive than 75 million doses not going out and into arms.
Well,
this is the J&J vaccine too.
Ah, that pisses me off.
75 million. Yeah, it's the same facility that's producing the AstraZeneca vaccines, and the 15 million that they fucked up the first time around was because they screwed up the recipe. And then I don't know what the hell happened to 60 million doses, but they just the generic word was contamination. So it could be anything from the growth medium being not strained out properly to fucking up the recipe yet again.
There are too many possibilities when it comes to biopharmaceutical stuff, especially if it's a bio product, which these kinds of proteins and mRNA is. It'll probably actually be an animal
cell. mRNA vaccine.
Right. Yeah. No. It's...
I mean,
it's a live adenovirus.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said mRNA. Any vaccine that is sitting there and producing proteins is typically going to be a eukaryotic cell, an animal cell, which is significantly harder than plasmoids or any one of the other or the stuff that you find in which plasmoids are like the DNA type that you find in E. coli. Is that what they use for that? I think it's E. coli. That's what I said. Yes,
there's
tomato.
There's no O in plasmid.
Yeah. There's plasmoids in Eve echoes, so
Well, yeah, a man is entitled to the fruit of his labor. Yes, indeed.
That's yes.
Plasmids are just ring-shaped DNA.
Yes,
that are exchanged between bacteria. Correct.
But the plasmids are also very easy to manipulate. So it's very easy to produce proteins for that. We tend to use things like those bacterial cells for stuff like insulin production, because it's a very simple gene. You insert it in there, you produce a crap load of insulin, you liquefy the cells, you filter out the material. But when you start talking about the overall eukaryotic cells, the ones that are much more advanced, that are typically what we more typically consider like an animal cell, they actually have to do all kinds of crazy genomic edits, and it's a lot more filtration because those things aren't very clean when they die and rupture. And then you start talking about trying to process it through. Half the cellular matter is going to lead to contamination.
So, again, whatever it was, I don't understand how 75 million doses down the toilet is more expensive than telling them to fuck off at this point.
It all depends on what they cost.
Okay, thousands of doses, I could understand. Even say they screwed up 75,000 doses or 750,000 doses.
Well, so you're
7.5 million doses.
60 million doses. I'll put a link to that article. I found it in the Times here. If anybody wants to follow up on it,
I think I might have mentioned it for the weekend show, but anyway.
Given the volume, I would guess that it's probably just one run. Like, I don't think I would be willing to bet you 75 million doses are produced on a single vat or a single batch.
So no. So the first 15 million was multiple batches. This new 60 million is multiple batches.
Is it really?
Yeah, this is not a single batch fuck up.
Wow.
No, they're fucking up a lot of it. And, I'm just going to say this now. I called this one that they're going to start fucking up the Johnson & Johnson because for some reason there seems to be something against getting that one out to people as easily.
Like the first 15 million that got screwed up, that was before there was any issue that was noticed in the data.
Yeah, I mean, they had 15 million to fuck up to try to get their shit together. So, I mean, that's a big learning experience. Was it wasted?
So the question, like the other thing is, they're the same facility that produces AstraZeneca's vaccine, and that's not going to hit the news really in the U.S. And I haven't really looked to see how much of that they screwed up. But I know that they screwed up the mix for the J&J vaccine by confusing it with the AstraZeneca for that first 15 million that they had to throw out. But we're talking about millions of doses here. 75 million doses is actually pretty significant considering we've only...
Yeah, that's a one-shot deal.
We've only put out so many.
Yeah, you don't need two for that. There's no halving it. There's no nothing. That's 75 million people that could have a vaccine that I personally consider very safe and very robust. It bothers me. Yeah, legitimately.
It could also be like, I mean, we sit there and we're ranting about it, but don't forget, it could very well be that the actual process is, borderline in terms of how capable the process is, right? That's another possibility.
Well, the thing is, it's a mature process, though. It's just a minor modification to that specific thing.
Each process is different, and so if they're producing a process, and especially considering how much of it they have to produce and how quickly. It's very possible that the equipment and the scale that they're doing isn't the process that they design and the equipment that they have is not a capable process for what they're trying to do for their level of quality control.
I'm just saying here, the first 15 million that they screwed up was because they fucked up the recipe, like the additives you put into the vial at the end. They confused it with the AstraZeneca recipe, and they put a blended fuck up of both into the vials.
Well, that would be a perfect example of the process isn't in control. Come on now.
So when I say that the next 60 million that got fucked up, I'm curious as to exactly how they fucked that up, but I have my suspicions.
Yeah, we can maybe make some educated guesses, you could say.
And this is why I'm saying after 75 million doses have had to be thrown away for probably the same exact reason, it would be way cheaper to just kill the contract than to continue wasting money on it.
I will toss this out though, right? So we are both chemical engineers by degree, but I started off as a bioengineer. And one of the things that we did was we actually went to these plants and talked to these operators as part of our school biomedical stuff that we were doing. And one of the things that they say is it does happen fairly frequently, where you basically end up screwing up a batch and dumping it, which is one of the reasons why.
A batch.
It happens routinely for a batch, but a batch happens all the time.
And again, with the QA and QC, usually that's caught before it's something that is put on a pallet to be shipped out and then has to be recalled.
Yeah, and it's usually also not all of the fucking product that you've produced in that line.
No, it is. When they screw up a batch, they screw up all of it.
Well, yeah,
right?
But okay, fair enough.
I accept Craig's argument that it's kind of unreasonable to have put it on a pallet and shipped it out, but that can also happen too, right?
It can, but again,
twice.
Multiple batches.
Yeah, twice.
Multiple batches
over multiple runs.
When we went to the biofarm facility, there was two things that we learned there. One was that they routinely dump stuff that they're not supposed to dump down the drain because it's cheaper to pay the fine than it is to, properly clean it.
That's
one thing
true
we
at all
learned.
Plants.
That's one thing we learned. They're like, oh yeah, we're dumping this down the drain. And you're like, isn't that a violation? They're like, yeah, we told them to come in.
$5,000.
Oh, Thanks,
Cost
asshole.
It's only $5,000, and we told them about it, so it's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's even cheaper.
we it cost us $10,000 to dump it and $25,000 to clean it. So guess where it's going? So that was one thing you learned, and the second thing they said is that they basically fail batches all the time, which is one of the reasons why this stuff's really, really expensive. So when you start talking about, like, whenever Bernie Sanders gets up there and runs his mouth about his 20-cent pills, yeah, that's partially true, but at the end of the day, they also, you have a whole ton of ingredients that get wasted because any impurity in the batch screws the whole batch.
Right, but again, it's usually
across multiple runs. In this
usually
case,
it's
though.
one batch. Usually it's one batch. Now there are many one batches, but it's not usually like, hey, we screwed up 20 batches in a row with the same exact mistakes and didn't catch it until the pills are in the fucking bottle.
That's the thing, is that these processes, like, again, they're so susceptible to any form of contamination, and these kinds of plants are not particularly good at rush processing. Right, so getting to the point where all of a sudden they have to do something like put a shitload of meds out on a truck all the time that's not part of their normal schedule, it's very easy to see that they are fucking up completely by accident, right? Like I'm not.
It is theoretically possible.
I'm not saying it's not. Like we're reacting like it's this insane thing. It's really not.
I'm not saying that this is intentional. Well, actually, I'm kind of hinting at it maybe is intentional, but I couldn't back that up.
You are, yes.
The insanity here isn't that they screwed up batches. It's that they screwed up batches in the same way repeatedly, and their QA/QC, which is supposed to cover the fucking process.
Yeah, I mean,
didn't catch the shit until after the product was packaged.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that they'd catch it at least part of the way through the run the second time because they had the exact same problem the first time.
Like, did they have to package it up and like get it ready to leave the facility before they found out they fucked up? Normally, that stuff just gets drained out into a waste tank if they fuck it up like that.
So it also all depends, though, right? So if they didn't take enough samples or something like that, right?
They thought they had the wrong. They thought they were following the right recipe, and it was a fuck up of both recipes.
Sure, and I got that, but I mean, like that's not the QA/QC.
That is so not a we fucked up the one batch problem. That is a functional problem of the organization, not of the.
We gotta be very clear here, right? When we start talking about the people who are operating the tanks, these are not the engineers and scientists. These are technicians, right? They are attempting to follow a recipe, but if you have ever worked with operations personnel aren't quite as robust as
they
average.
They make or break a process, and this is a perfect example of it because they broke the process.
Utterly.
And I am absolutely sure they had a perfectly good justification because having dealt with a lot of operations personnel,
they
goddamn well better. 75 fucking million doses.
I worked with operations personnel who had like a man lift, which is just like a scissor jack kind of thing, and they crashed into scaffolding while doing an asbestos job and created a giant mess, and they blamed the equipment. They said that the knob just randomly move forward. So
I've known gamers that blamed a fucking refresh rate on a TV. Doesn't make a difference.
Operations, agreed, and that's easy for us as engineers to say because that's our byline. That's we live and die essentially on an honor code, unlike most professions nowadays. But operations personnel do two things: one, they have a justification for every single time they fuck up, and two, when they fuck up, they try to cover it up. So, it is very possible.
I mean, that's the thing, though. They couldn't cover up 15 million, and then they fucked up 60 million. Like, at that point, just say it, you know?
I agree, but what I'm trying to get at is it's not as unreasonable or outlandish because they're doing a process that they're not familiar with. It is on a time scale and a time crunch.
But they are familiar with it. It's a facility that produces vaccines.
Yeah, it'd be another thing if they were trying to repurpose one of these places. Like if this was a line of ventilators that was made at one of the GM plants, I
But it
get
could
that,
easily
but
be. It could be a different tank size.
I
They could
mean,
be running it on a different line. They could be doing. There's
you're
so
you're
many
providing
variables.
reasonable arguments here, but again,
that they aren't.
they couldn't follow a fucking like for a
I'm
normal operation. I agree. Yes, you can fuck up. Like one batch, you're typically gonna have a bad batch a day.
at
It gets
least
drained to
at
the waste
least
tank
at
at
least
least,
at least
and every
with
one of
bio
those,
with biofarm it's like 50% or more. By the way.
right, and every single one of those in a normal operation gets drained out to a waste tank or put down the drain.
Right.
Like it doesn't make it to a product container
Or
ready to ship.
alternatively shipped over to the Budweiser facility to fill up that nice Bud Light can. Because that shit ain't got alcohol or beer in it.
Right.
I wouldn't know, but I'll take your word for it because beer's
or,
horrible.
if, for anybody in the southern states, if it's a Keystone Light is the piss water. Oh no,
Sigh.
the Bud Light down here tastes almost like beer. The Keystone Light, however, is worse than Natty.
Well, I mean, it is Florida. Like I've tasted what you guys call pizza. It is somehow a horrible abomination. Like
Yeah, you're from a horrible place to call that kind of a thing abomination.
all I'm saying is you guys think Pizza Hut is a reasonable approach to pizza.
Nobody does. You
Oh
kidding
yes,
me?
they do. Oh yes, they do.
No, the Pizza Hut's where you go to have a brawl, and that's it.
I mean, that sounds
And if
reasonable,
nobody knows what
especially
I'm
if you're
talking
talking about
about,
Florida.
if nobody knows what I'm talking about, go look up Jiker. All right.
Sigh.
There's a brawl at the hut. Anyway.
Yeah.
But like, so like they usually you waste out these bad batches, and it's part of the process to know whether or not you've got a bad batch.
Again,
More importantly,
all of that is true. All of that is true, but we are talking about higher scrutiny because of what it is. These are always complex processes. There is a crunch timeline.
Normally, yeah, these are excuses though. For the again, this
is kind of apologia, dude. It really kind of is.
I don't blame the technicians here because they were following the recipe they were given.
Oh, the engineers fucked up.
Somebody sure the fuck did.
I think it was somebody who fucked up an email. You know, like this is an administrative failure, especially because it was fucking repeated.
I mean, well, you kind of know where I'm coming from with this, but I mean, this just lends more credibility to my crazy theories about the stuff.
I really don't. So having done what I've done and having worked where I've worked, fuck ups happen literally all the time. I have seen jobs go completely sideways. People basically especially if things have gone sideways, I've seen them abandon all reason and defend the most dumb approaches, and then I've watched them go out and make the exact same mistake a second time. Right? Like it is a routine.
This is just one of those things where like you almost wish, like, you don't wish death on people, but like you've seen those videos of the Chinese people moving the scaffolding into the high voltage line. At least they're not going to repeat the mistake. And that's a horrible suggestion there.
Well, I have to wonder, if it wasn't malice, then were these laboratories hiring based on quotas, maybe? Is that what we're looking at here?
No, I mean it's just it is the bargain basement of the bargain basement. These guys are going to get paid $10 to $15 an hour to go pour water in a tank, put something in, take a couple measurements, and keep their numbers there. The engineer is only involved in the initial scale up. The scientist is only involved in the initial research, and the rest of it gets handed off to technicians who basically attempt to follow a recipe, but if you've ever watched the British Bake Off, they fuck that shit up literally all the time. And it's their own fucking recipe. And those are the actual bakers. So, stuff happens. It really does. It happens routinely. It happens reliably.
But,
I'm sure
it to happen with, one batch,
I'm sure if we put
a million dose fuck up.
I'm sure if we threw Craig in there with a ball and a chain, there would be no mistakes. I'm sure if we threw me in there, just, drunk, there would still be no mistakes. But you start talking about these operations guys, it happens, it's routine, you roll your eyes, and you got to deal with it.
I expect maybe, when I'm talking about order of magnitude here, I expect maybe a million dose fuck up once.
Yeah.
It all depends.
We're talking about multiple millions, multiple times, over time, over multiple batches in proximity.
So the first batch fuck up was 15 million, right?
No, I see. That's not. It's not one batch.
The first
What's
batch
the size
of
a
fuck
batch?
ups was 15 millions.
What's a batch size for the process? Do you guys know? I don't know.
That's a fair
know
question,
off the top of my
actually.
head. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably on the order of 100,000.
Holy shit!
I
Really?
would be.
God damn.
I would bet it's a lot higher than that.
I would
that's-
sincerely hope so, because that really speaks horrifyingly
Keep
poorly.
in mind that one batch is not run on all units. It's one batch run on one line of units. So
yeah, but
I mean,
most
that
of these
whole batch is
facilities-
going to be a larger amount.
You have multiple parallel product lines, which is how they can. So this is why I think it's an administrative failure, because if you give everyone the same recipe, they're gonna fuck up in the same way.
I would guess.
Which
Given
is
that
why
it's
they
one
got
shot,
to 15 million.
given it's one shot, and from what I've seen, most of these facilities have a maximum of 3 or 4 lines. And if you were to sit there and talk about the scale up, because whenever you're talking about bioprocesses, and this is true for everything from beer to whatever, if you're trying to grow a culture, you do a scale up phase, and it's not your pilot. Like literally, they start with a jar, they get that going, and they dump 10%. That takes up 10% of volume of another thing, and then they let that colonize, and then they dump that into a bigger tank, and then they dump that into a bigger tank, and that's how they do their scale. It wouldn't surprise me if the 15 million was a single batch, and so all you're talking about here is five batches, right? Is it terrible? Yes. Is it unreasonably high? I mean, if 50%, they might make 10 batches in the same period of time, and half of them were good and half of them were bad, and that would be perfectly within the acceptable.
You're talking about this.
Normal
You're talking about this as if they're making billions of doses, but they're not.
No, I'm talking about this.
Yeah,
as
they
if they're
should have
making
better
15
QC considering the scale that they're working with here. I mean, just
Well,
straight
no,
out.
I mean, you don't get better QC with scale. Like that's not how QC works.
Okay, fair enough, but I mean, they should have. Everything they've made is fucked, dude. Everything that came out of that fucking facility is junk.
And that'll happen, right? You have a work crew again.
Well, here's the thing: is there? It's also tied to a lot of. So they've been able to tie loosely as it is, because obviously they're not inspecting the facility because they're foreign nations. But like the shit that's been going on from the AZ vaccine in Europe, a lot of the bad batches at the Baltimore facility might be the reason.
Wouldn't that be fucking ironic?
Which would be fucked up, but
that'd be a fucking horror show.
That's one of the current suggestions out there, and that's a problem.
There's a question that certainly needs an answer.
I mean, you won't be able to get that, because unless we can sit there and start making tainted batches and start injecting them into people, we'll never find out.
Well, you see, this is one of the reasons why, I think.
Well, this is why we need good tracking, so that we know where those particular batches were administered.
I am
not of
all
people,
for,
of batches, obviously, because I don't support the tracking of people on this shit.
I'm all for running the tainted batch experiment on Xinjiang Poo there, so.
How about we run the bad batches as experiments? How about we run those on the people that fucking made them?
I take no issue with that. I mean, physician, heal thyself, right? Use your own medicine. Here you go.
Take your own mercury thiocyanate, right?
Oh, that's bullshit. That's bullshit.
Well, who can say?
Well, it looks fantastic when you light it off. It's an excellent firework.
So he's sitting there and specifically referencing the one fucking anti-vaxxer study that created the anti-vax movement. And as much, again, I am opposed to taking the vaccine, but that's because of risk assessments that I've done. But at the same time, when it comes to the anti-vax movement, the mercury thiosulfate was fucking retarded, because it was this itty-bitty tiny proportion of the actual thing. It had no profound effect, and the actual cause of the rise of autism was due to a very identifiable...
Okay, so I wasn't talking about thimerosal.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't recognize that particular chemical.
Mercury thiocyanate. Mercury thiocyanate is the chemical that is responsible for the Pharaoh's serpent firework. but mercuric thiocyanate was also previously used to get rid of gastric parasites back when people didn't know what the fuck mercury was.
Oh, that sounds horrifying.
Nah.
People also chewed cinnabar, which is
Did they?
mercury. Yeah, but that, you see, it's largely insoluble. Mercury sulfides.
Well, I guess that's a good thing.
So it didn't really kill them. It just didn't do anything useful.
Oh,
I mean,
certainly not. And on
Besides,
the
make
off
them feel
chance
like
that
they
your
were doing
body
something.
might actually, get some lodge somewhere.
All it did was give them rumbly tummies for a little while.
It had the same profound effect that any cure discovered by a teacher has on
Right.
common cold.
But yeah, thimerosal, that stuff is one, you'd require a lot of it to get sick from it, and two, it's present in such a small quantity. Not even like it's used as a preservative, but it's barely useful at that, and it's also gone from almost all vaccines.
Yeah,
Almost
actually,
it
I
is.
will
vaccines.
personally comment on that as that being one of my chief concerns about vaccines done today. That is actually out of most things. You will still want to check your MSDS if you're somebody that's curious about vaccines or cautious about
But
them.
even then, the amount of mercury.
There's a handful of vaccines left it's present in, and none of them are childhood vaccines.
And regardless,
Like, the annual
levels,
flu vaccine is one of them, I think.
the levels that it's at is so low that it won't have any profound effect upon you or your
You would
development.
need to take so many vaccines.
Yes.
So, all right, let me just put it like this: it would be impossible for you to absorb the amount of fluid and process it through your body in a year.
Yes.
To take the number of vaccines that would be required to get you to the point where you're eating a can of tuna in one day, let alone the entire fucking year.
Right.
Well,
So
fair enough.
Unless
but,
you have unless your blood volume is the size of a fucking 40,000 gallon swimming pool, you're fine.
yeah, but it
and
does
again, this
build
is,
up. So
it does, but at the same time,
mercury is not a cumulative poison. One, two, it is a catalytic toxin, and three, thimerosal binds it so tightly it will never leave the molecule in your body.
yes.
So it's not toxic for you at the quantities that you can get it from a vaccine. You would get more mercury from a can of tuna than from all your childhood vaccines had they had thimerosal in them.
Right. Like I have no issue finding out that's like I'd give that to my kid for a childhood vaccine because I'm not concerned about it. The only reason I'm not taking this vaccine is again the risk posture associated with it and the unknowns. And I know what I finally got a good data point or a good range on what my estimated risk is from COVID, and based on my estimated risk and in proportion to other life risks, I see no reason for me to inoculate myself or to.
Now, something that Steve can't agree with me on here.
What's that?
Between the two of us, we're not medical professionals. When it comes to your own personal medical issues, including getting vaccinated,
Oh,
if you're not
absolutely.
someone who does the research for yourself, go talk to your doctor.
yeah.
Yes. So as a reference point for those who are curious, it looks to be about a 1 in 12 to 1 in 13,000 risk factor for those who are healthy adults between the 18 to 44 age group. But if you have any other potential health conditions, your survival rate goes down
And
significantly.
let's be honest, if you're a United States citizen, that's 2/3 of you.
No, obesity is not one of the major ones that has a significant effect.
Okay.
It is stuff. It's not. If you actually go through the stuff that has significant impacts, it's hard effects, immunocompromised, diabetes.
Oh, yeah, all those things that are caused by being obese. Right. Got it. Okay.
Right. So if you're obese but you don't have diabetes, you don't have the risk factor associated with diabetes.
Okay.
Right. So if you've
Now,
got
another thing-
pre-diabetes, you're fine, is what you're saying.
I'm 45 minutes past when I should leave, but I should say one more thing here. So we covered before, Evan and I,
And
that
if you happen to take
Sinovacs.
happen to take hydroxychloroquine and zinc, apparently your survival rate goes down to 1 in 75,000 is your risk of death. So
Fair point.
just throwing it
That
out.
depends on when you take it. That just
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
playing
that
it.
is
Depends on
true.
when you take it.
I am
And
okay.
the
I am
studies that
okay with
show-
figuring that shit out.
The funny thing is, the studies that show that it's not effective are when they gave it to people who are like at death's door.
Yeah, like
and the
Yeah.
studies
folks that
where
were
they show
about
it is
to die.
effective.
Well, there's
And
two
more
things.
importantly, the study didn't give a shit when they gave the medicine. They just gave the medicine. Whereas the studies that show it's effective were very specific about when they gave it,
Yep.
and it had a profound effect.
Well, and on top of that, you also take a look at the studies that were claiming it wasn't effective. They weren't using the full protocol, right? Every single one,
Right.
you'd read it, it'd be like, it's hydroxychloroquine. Well, that didn't seem to have an effect. And then you go read another one, and it goes, zinc. It doesn't seem to have an effect. And you're like, okay, so the claim is that these two things together produce an effect. And I think there's a proposed mechanism for why it works. I can't remember what it is.
Right. Well, there is, and also adding in azithromycin.
Yeah.
There's a specific key study which was very effectively ignored by the media.
Yeah,
Oh,
Zev
yeah.
Zelenko. Look him up.
Right. Where they did all three, and it's very effective. It was a 75% reduction in mortality.
Yep.
That's fucking huge.
Yeah, enormous.
Yep.
And the fact that like this is what I mean by healthcare administrators being so entrenched in their fucking TDS that they're allowing people to die in hospitals.
Yeah, better that some people, some innocent people, no less, die than
It
that
is.
the
Yeah.
orange man.
And they're not all Trumpers, by the way. They're grandmothers for their fucking liberal grandmothers for their liberal grandchildren that are dead because you couldn't handle the fact that the orange-faced asshole said something that was true.
Let's pause for just a moment and reflect on the 600,000 some odd Americans who are purportedly dead from COVID. We've talked about how those numbers get inflated. But if we were to take just this study and they were to have applied the treatment protocol early on, we could have saved up to 400,000 lives from that treatment protocol alone. And probably sat there and saved another 100,000. So that would be 200,000 people that would be dead. We could have saved another 100,000 had we not had the Democrats shove a whole bunch of people into nursing homes.
Yeah.
So quite literally,
well,
COVID
not just
could have
nursing
ended.
homes. Let's also include mental facilities, which, by the way,
we could also-
still not resolved that issue.
But the point is, COVID could have absolutely ended up looking just like a bad flu season.
Yeah.
Had we not sat there and prevented treatment.
Hell, it could have been 15 people. It could have been 15 people if we closed the fucking border.
Yeah.
That's.
Could have been.
It could have been even less than that if China hadn't attempted to sit there and fly as many of their infected citizens from the United States as possible.
Italy could have avoided their 15% mortality rate had they not been inundated with the fucking the Wuhan plague combined with the Hug a Chinese initiative. It's still so fucking amazing to me.
Yep.
Oh well, it's all xenophobia. Go hug people who just flew in from the place where the shit's going down.
Yep. Well, I mean, you pause for a moment and you listen to the folks who are, and I'm not a huge fan of the MAGA folks because I think they take it a little bit too far sometimes, and I think they're irrational.
Well, a lot of them are fucking nuts.
Yeah, they're fucking nuts.
Some of the raggedy crew that's left is very raggedy.
Right. So,
well, I mean, never mind the FBI shit that's been going on.
Yeah,
Just
never mind the
imagine-
feds and the glow-in-the-darks.
I'm
but
not
just imagine the people who would follow them.
I'm not a huge fan of all that stuff, but just pause for a moment when they were talking about it being a pandemic, and when you take into account the fact that we denied treatment protocol and could have dropped our deaths by 2/3 from an appropriate treatment protocol, which was discovered in like February or March, by the way.
It was March,
Right?
March and April, but basically March.
So we could have saved hundreds of thousands of people had the Democrats not touched this.
That is to say, hundreds of thousands in America alone.
Democrats not politicized masks to the extent that they did, and not like had they actually done lockdowns or just not fucking done lockdowns. And we'll just say had they not done lockdowns.
Had they not done lockdowns and not done mask mandates, yep, you're right. We would.
Had they just said, "Here's the PPE, please protect yourselves," adults, maybe they would have been able to get away with it.
If you feel like
it, they would have had no. Right, sure. Have they given people the ability to just like making informed decisions and then not treated them like children.
Yes. That's really what it comes down to. So again, I cited my number associated with COVID risk, which is, and that is in comparison to life risks, because I have to be exposed to that shit all the time. That's like a nuclear byline, by the way. But had they actually come out and been responsible, done a treatment protocol, not shoved people in nursing homes, and allowed Americans to make informed decisions, A, there'd be another dude in the White House right now, so we wouldn't look as fucked up in front of the G7 as we do.
Oh.
And B, the pandemic would have been under control and over by May or June with none of the economic pain and none of the stupid bullshit that we're dealing with now. Thank you, Democrats.
Yeah. Now, Craig, you had said you need to.
It's not even entirely on them. It's not even entirely on them. There are so many fucked up politicians. Like, just, you know, like this. Had Democrats come out and said, drowning yourself is bad, there would have been 1,000 people in Texas who would have gone out and stuck their head in the lake because they're fucking morons. Like, there's such a difference between flexing your rights and being a moron for the sake of being a moron.
I don't think so, right? Again, you and I have a different view on
There's
math.
a huge difference on that.
And I don't think being somebody who is vehemently opposed to masks, I was not opposed to masks because of Democrats.
Okay, let me put it like this. There are people who went out and protested in Michigan that maintained social distance, had self-awareness to know if they were sick to stay home, shit like that, had no problems. Then there are people who went out and crowded around each other and said freedoms and shit.
Michigan still had lockdowns, and I actually,
right.
I 100% supported anybody who walked up and was protesting in New York against Cuomo and his orders and his mandates.
And then you had, again,
I 100% say that's perfectly reasonable.
The point here being the difference is the people who were doing protests there had the self-awareness to not put themselves at increased risk for infectious disease, whereas people in other places didn't have that self-awareness.
I mean, again, coming from New York, I think that it was appropriate to sit there and protest Cuomo. I think it was appropriate to protest the mask mandates. I think it was appropriate to protest the lockdowns, wherever that occurred. Now,
sure.
You want to start talking about marching in the street during a quote-unquote pandemic that you're purportedly super scared about because, you think that there's a rampant attack on black people? Not so much, because there's no fucking data that supports that.
Well, look, you see, the virus is very intelligent and discerning, and it knows that if you're a person of color or a white liberal marching for people of color, then you're definitely not going to get infected. Especially if you're mouth-to-mouth sharing fucking bottles of champagne out in the streets after the election day.
I still believe that they turned around. And they were sitting there and they're going, look at these people trying to murder you all for protesting about their rights. And then the next week, all the Democrats flooded the city streets and started marching. And they're like, well, it's seriously going to actually decrease the amount of COVID cases there are. You're like, oh my God.
Well, there's the systemic racism that's going to be cured by all of these people going out.
I'm just asking them to pick a lane. I don't care what lane it is. I just ask them to pick a fucking lane.
Have the decency to be consistent in your bullshit.
Right. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong as long as you are consistently wrong.
Like, if you're going to be wrong, I don't know. If they're at least if you're going to pick all the above, make sure to circle the other answers too.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't really get to go back and say, yeah, no, I didn't mean all that. It's like, well, you can say that, but that doesn't change a goddamn thing, you fucking liar.
As a great allegory here, if you're going to Christmas tree the test, just fill in every circle on the Scantron. Make that black block a true reality. God damn, fucking idiots.
Speaking of tests, I have to go start looking for schools and what program I'm going to do. I think at Penn State, actually.
Wow, interesting, cool.
Yeah, well, so they did a college fair where they actually got them onto our special network for people who don't have clearances, and we got to listen to UOT at Austin, Penn State, and then Pitt. I hated UPitt. I hate schools that sit there and broadcast how wonderful and special and magical their placement is in a random ranking by some magazine. That shit pisses me the fuck off. I want to know your program and I want to know your attitude. I want to know
so you're telling me you haven't like sat there and listened to the NUPOC seminars yet?
the what?
NUPOC.
What's that?
Probably something horrible.
NUPOC. It's the Navy's nuclear submarine program.
Oh. Well, that actually sounds
So
kind of interesting.
they come by and they canvass chemical engineers heavily.
Oh yeah, yeah they do.
And
Luckily, I was fat at the time, like really fat at the time.
So what they do is they come in and they say, all right, look, all you have to do is serve 2 years and you're going to get like 5 master's degrees out of it. And it's like, yeah, that's so bullshit. I'm not doing it.
Actually, that's
but there's always the person with like a 2.0 GPA who's like, I think I'm interested.
That's not entirely incorrect. They will give you that. The only problem is you're going to go to your 12-hour shift where you're going to do incidental shit on a reactor, and then you're going to go home and you have to sit there and study your ass off because you're going through nuclear power school.
Right.
So
the thing is, they don't tell you that 2 years can easily turn into 8.
Oh yeah, absolutely it can. So they will provide you. They will provide you and say, hey, yes, you can do this. But yeah, no, you actually have to.
And if it ever goes to wartime, your ass is out to sea.
Yep.
Yeah,
no
you're out
asked.
until it comes back.
Well, I mean,
that happens with or without war already from tours of duty, because they will put you on rotation immediately, and you learn on the job.
No. Then, they send you to power school.
Right, but then they put you on the damn subs, and you have to go in and watch the reactor with the other guys.
Yeah, but you don't.
They expect you to be out to sea.
There's no learning on the job. It's like so Navy nukes is like a year qualification. We actually do the training right up where I'm at.
Right.
Like literally, my wife works at the site where they run the prototype reactors and the test reactors.
Right.
For the ships. Unfortunately, I have a big beef there.
You're missing something here, Steve.
But
you're missing something here. You can study during your off time while you're on the sub for 6 months, and then perform your normal duties, and then go and shadow some guy who's staring at a reactor for a few hours a day.
Yep.
And that can be part of your power school training.
Yep. But
it's not just sitting in a dorm on shore when you say you go to power school.
You're not sitting in a dorm on shore, but you aren't deployed until you pass. They're like super stringent about it. Trust me when I say they are. The thing that really pisses me off dealing with Navy nukes, because I have to deal with Navy nukes all the time, is they are the most arrogant motherfuckers because they're told like they're the 1% of the 1%, and so when you try to tell them that they're wrong,
pilots from the Air Force.
Right. So when you try to tell them they're wrong, they just don't listen. And then they go off and they do something, and it blows up in their face.
Yeah, I can believe that.
The fun part is slapping people like that in the face with their own incompetence.
Absolutely it is. And I love my
really
job
hard.
because I get to do that all day long.
Well, there's definitely a certain fulfillment in that.
I don't understand. How could I be wrong? It's like, well, you're human and you're really fucking stupid. But somehow you're buttered up to be here.
They aren't the kids who make it through power school aren't stupid. I wouldn't go that
Correct.
far, but I will say that
just to put them in their place when they ask the dumb question.
They have an ego that is stunning and brave.
You don't say.
It's a stunning and brave ego.
I mean, ego's in the room, notwithstanding, of course.
Yes. Well, so be it.
Hey, that royal we included my ass. I know I can have an ego.
Hey, look, I don't have an ego. I'm just always right. There's a difference.
I guess that remains to be seen.
No, it really plays out pretty well for me. I assure you. We walk into a room and we go. I say, "This is what you're gonna do," and they say, "I don't wanna," and you're like, "Okay, good, go ahead, go ask that guy right over there," and they go, "Ask the guy." And they come back and say, "Well, I guess we're doing what you said." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's funny how that works."
Well, the world is kind of funny.
Anything else? Anything else you plan on not doing, pal?
Right.
What's that?
I say you turn around. Anything else you plan on not doing, pal?
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
Speaking of not
I
doing,
gotta
I think
my
you had said you might need to get out of here, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, Craig, if you need to get out.
I do need to. I do need to jump out. I'm an hour past when I wanted to leave.
Understandable, understandable. You got
see.
the family duties and all that.
You know, time flies when you're having fun and whatnot. Even if fun in this case
he
is bitching about shit that's going on in the world.
he said duty.
I did. I did.
We're adults. It's awesome.
It is. I can make fun of duty.
Indeed, you can. Well, you have a good night, Craig, and I
That's
believe
a perfect note to leave on.
absolutely. Now, I believe you had said you had wanted to talk about what an amazing fuck up Fauci is, and at least do a victory lap on him before we finish up the night.
You tease me. All right, I am out
I-
of here.
Aha!
Enjoy eating that fucking giant slice of cake.
I will. That is a beautiful slice of cake. It is a slice of cake that I argued against many people, even people on this show, and it was a
I'm
tasty
sorry.
cake.
At what point did anybody on here say Fauci was a great guy? Because I'm
Yeah,
pretty
I
sure.
never said Fauci
That
was
is
a
to
great
say,
guy.
you argued the point with us on this platform.
Oh no. I mean, there's a separate point I'll get to where I get to take my victory.
Anyway, you do so.
Don't
Have a good
worry.
night, guys.
I will.
Night, man.
It's gonna be great. Oh yeah. So it was just the I think the big thing that I wanted to get into was the whole mask thing. Because at the end of the day, I heard so many people, and it was said on the show that Fauci lied about, his initial order associated with not wearing masks, and it turns out that he didn't. That he just sat there and did exactly what I said, which is he actually gave his technical opinion, and then got browbeat for 3 weeks, and then caved, which is irresponsible. You as a technical expert should not cave on your technical opinion because a whole bunch of people are yelling at you about it.
No, absolutely not. I can say
Especially-
that as a non-technical expert.
Especially if you are the highest paid person in the federal government.
Yeah, like if
If
you're
you
the fucking
cave-
face and voice of this shit, you really need to be stern as a goddamn rock.
Right. So when it came down to the Fauci stuff, I was laughing immensely because everybody's like, What does it mean? How can Fauci have not believed masks work? He was lying because that was the narrative. That was the narrative the press put out. That was the narrative a lot of people put out because they read him coming out on that 60 Minutes interview and saying we needed it for medical personnel as him saying it actually works and we just needed to make sure these people got it, when in reality it doesn't really work for the general populace, but you need it in a hospital because you're the blast zone. Like it actually makes a difference, which was what I was arguing. It's a ballistic snot barrier. It does nothing other than protect you against ballistic snot. And if you're not in range of ballistic snot, it's not a barrier.
Asterisk.
If you're not no asterisk.
I'm putting it there myself. Continue.
There's no asterisk.
There is. Go ahead.
There isn't.
There's a small one. There is a small but noteworthy asterisk. You may continue, sir.
There are no asterisks. There's certain individuals who believe there are asterisks, but there are no asterisks per those emails. There's no asterisks per those studies.
His.
If anybody is curious, I finally re-logged into Twitter. It was a mistake.
Generally, yes, fair.
So just for those who don't know, the reason I was not here, and I haven't been here because I've got a lot of shit going on. I had a lot of shit going on because I had a trip coming up last week. Went down to Vegas, went out to Death Valley, ran out of gas in Death Valley.
Oh, Jesus.
So I had nothing to do. I ran out of stuff to do on my eve there. So, and the internet wasn't particularly great, so I loaded up Twitter, and boy, was it a mistake. But if you do go check out my Twitter page, I do have somewhere in there. I should probably pin it.
I'll put a link to that, actually.
A very good thread in my Twitter on the actual science and results of masks. It shows the studies showing the efficacy of the masks in the various groups. It shows the efficacy of lockdowns in the various groups. It shows the studies, the meta-analysis, and the reviews that I was citing back in March associated with these things, which identify the same stuff that Fauci was talking about in his private emails. So, long story short, my victory lap is while we all agree that Fauci is an asshole, Fauci did not, in fact, believe that masks did anything. What he believed was that they don't, and he was browbeat and then caved, which is as the highest paid technical expert in the United States government. He should be fired for that.
Fair, yes. I agree with that portion of things, absolutely.
If you are not willing to stand by your technical decision, then you should be fired from the position or removed from the role. You have to be able to stand
absolutely.
up.
I mean, you have to be like a rock. You have to be adamantine in your positions, because if you aren't and you sway on them, then who's to trust anything you say from there on?
And that's exactly what ended up happening. Had he stuck to the mask thing, not changed the CDC recommendation, and basically said, come out and said what he said, which was the CDC recommendation, having written a lot of these kind of okay, fine, whatever, you douchebag pieces. The CDC changed the recommendation was, if you want to wear a cloth bandana, go right ahead. We're not going to stop you. It wasn't that masks do anything. That was the initial one that they put out, and then they revised it later on.
Masks asterisk.
But it wasn't masks asterisk.
No, I'm just putting that one there myself again.
You can put it there all you want.
Masks meaning masks that actually do work, not bullshit masks that don't. And we do agree on what those are, but we'll continue on that later.
No, we actually don't.
Well, we kind of do. You stand for like a higher standard than I do, but whatever. It's kind of neither here nor there.
At the end, the point that Fauci made in the emails is a relevant one, and it's one that I've made before multiple times. Masks don't work because even if you use the ones that quote unquote do work, people don't follow the appropriate protocols, and at the same time, it tends to enhance the overall infection rate as time goes on, predominantly because it lets people feel closer and safer. So masks.
I won't disagree with you. I saw people wearing masks in the most irresponsible of ways, and I've seen it and seen it and seen it.
So
in ways that are less safe than not wearing it at all.
Right. So at the end of the day, Fauci's point, my point is that even if you wanted to turn around and throw on N95 respirators or HEPA, well, actually a HEPA like PAPR, if you wanted to throw a PAPR on, I'm not going to say anything about that. That would probably work. But if you wanted to throw on an N95 or the ASTM level 2s in general, and you wanted to decree this for the populace, which we don't have the supply lines to do for everyone in the country, even if you thought those masks work, which I don't, but even if you thought those masks work, at the end of the day, if nobody's actually following all of the, and that is all of the protocols, all of the time, then you make the situation worse.
Well, I mean, I can talk all the shit I want in the world because I have been the whole time. So, there you go. But, I mean, my protocols of living are kind of unreasonable compared to what a lot of other people do and say.
Well, if you don't wear it in the appropriate way, if you don't wash it, well, actually, sorry, wash it. You can't wash it.
Quote unquote wash. If you don't sanitize it, shall we say?
If you in any way touch or adjust your mask over the course of the day for personal comfort, you are increasing spread. So by the time you're done, masks can't work because people aren't perfect. At best, you can do it in a hazmat situation because everybody knows that they will die when they touch their face. But you can't do that in a general situation. And plus, masks do not protect you from perfectly healthy people. And they don't protect you from people who are asymptomatic. And that was the other points that were made in Fauci's emails.
In general, yes.
I mean, asymptomatic spread is not a thing. Like they studied that. That came out in. It
actually does appear that is actually pretty much the case. That it kind of is, but it's an outlier from what I understand.
So that is my victory lap. We went the whole pandemic. We argued back and forth on this show, and it turns out the actual background discussion that's happening at the higher levels, Steve was right. I take my bow.
Wow, kudos to you, sir. And you get to take that this time.
I do.
Indeed you do. And I mean, it's really nice to dunk on Fauci. I mean, the whole grids thing and the bathhouses thing and all that bullshit and the fact that he's probably got a legitimate malice in his heart. I mean, yeah.
I don't think he does.
I think he does.
I don't think I'll go that far. Like,
Now, I'm not going to say he's like a Dr. No or anything like that, or some kind of Goldfinger kind of dude. I'm just going to say that he's probably a bit of a psychopath that really has zero value for human beings as,
I
individuals other
will.
than utilities that can get him farther in his world. I have
I
nothing to back
will.
that up. That's entirely just me speculating based on, hunches and what little bit of body reading I can do from what I've seen of him.
So going with what I originally said, which was masks don't work, going with what we found from the Fauci emails, which is he agrees. What we can accuse him of is not acting as a technical expert in a technical expert role,
Well, we can
right?
accuse him of anything, but that's the one thing that we can throw on him without any kind of. We are
That is
blameless
that
in
is a
saying that
hundred
of
percent
him.
true. Right. That is 100% true. That is identified from his own personal emails. And if you sit there and you say,
It
"Hey,
is an
he caved,"
accusation above reproach.
if you take that as he is willing to cave in the face of media reporting, then that actually explains all of the flip-flopping and all of the bullshit through the rest of the pandemic. Because basically he would say something,
And,
and
I
then
can
he'd go
actually add
watch
on
the
to
news.
that with his recent interviews and the way that NPR spun some of these leaks. Or I shouldn't say leaks. It wasn't leaked. It was Freedom of Information Acted. But the way that NPR spun this as Fauci found out all the cool things he could do with his fame, but didn't really want the fame until he found out about these cool things and then did them. Their reporting on that actually kind of lays bare exactly what you're saying. As he found himself to be a more and more public figure, he just kind of
Right.
reveled in it.
Well, and I wouldn't even necessarily go with reveled. So one of the things that you find out when you actually start writing documents and having to deal with government entities, politics is abound. And I'm sure this is probably true everywhere you go. And it's not, Democrat versus Republican, but basically you'll turn around and you'll make a decision as a technical expert, and that's your decision, and that's your right. You as the individual are paid to make that decision, and then everybody and their brother will grumble and complain about it. And there are a lot of technical experts who will cave. I do not happen to be one of them. I take Pyrrhic victories. I have literally a mug at my desk that says, "To save time, just assume I'm right." That is, and I bring that to meetings every single time somebody questions me, because the follow-up meeting to that, they get to read that the entire time and explain why it was that my original statement was correct. So this happens. People do compromise. I don't, and I don't respect people who do. But that is if you look at Fauci through that lens, all he's doing is basically caving. It's not responsible. As an individual who's paid nearly $500,000 a year per the federal government, he should not be caving when on his own technical expertise. He should be attempting to provide statements and clarify and explain to people why they're wrong. Because if he's doing anything less than that, he's not acting as a technical expert. And that's really what you see. So when you saw the double masking thing, that's just the news was sitting
Oh
there and
yeah, I
reporting a
mean,
whole bunch of articles on
any
double
person
masking.
worth their salt's going to be able to look at that just from an engineering standpoint and say this is stupid, without
Right.
even getting into the numbers of it and the additional shear that's going to put onto any droplets that do exist
Right.
and make them even more aerosolized. Even above and beyond that, it's dumb on the face of it because your own cognitive mind can realize how stupid this is.
So why did he endorse it? Well, the news was sitting there and running puff pieces about maybe we should wear 2 masks. And for whatever reason, the news does that. So, and I also want to throw out all those motherfuckers who put that stupid fucking sign about how they believe the science. When Fauci said you don't need masks, how many of you wanted to wear one anyways? The science said masks don't do shit. How many people didn't care what the science said? They thought they were right. That is the fun part. They only want to believe the science when it agrees with them. They don't want to believe the science when it says, no, you're full of shit.
Yeah, no. As a matter of fact, they actively want to cancel said science.
Yep.
Like for instance, our new friend, I guess we should say, Jon Stewart, when he went on Colbert, and was like, it's named after the fucking laboratory people, and I mean, I've made similar lines, and it's not exactly. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but he's a comedian. People, come on, that's what they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. That was really funny.
Like
The
actually
thing.
funny. I haven't seen the bit myself, but I've seen a little bit of transcript, and there's comedy there, like actual comedy from a
Well,
person who understands what fucking timing is.
Well, I'd even take a step back, right? I think one of the things that so the left is running on the history has a left wing bias, and a lot of this comes because people like myself and Evan and Craig, we all were raised in the early 2000s. I think you go back a little bit further than Craig or I do, in
A
terms of your
little bit.
cognitive awareness, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
so
Actually, when I
you're
was young, I was thinking about things I probably oughtn't have.
So your cognitive awareness is probably sometime in the 90s.
Oh,
Ours is
certainly.
sometime the early 2000s. But during that period of time, if you wanted to talk about secularism won the fight, and they won handily. You had Penn and Teller's bullshit. You had shows like Jon Stewart's The Daily Show, and they did punch after punch on rational, reasonable beliefs, and the left and the right basically agreed that some of the stupid non-secular bullshit should go down the drains. And somehow we have lost that, and when Jon Stewart comes out of retirement to talk like this we're basically getting to take a look back at that lost element of secularism.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
are
I mean, you could really say there was kind of a baby thrown out with the bathwater on that one.
well, I don't think it's a baby thrown out with a bathwater. I think,
Well, yeah, I'm being a little hyperbolic with my statement there, but I
my
mean, I'll stand by it.
I think we're looking at a ghost in the machine type scenario. Essentially, human beings require religion to a greater or lesser extent, and when it is absent, we invent it.
Yeah, as a
So
matter of fact,
secularism.
there was someone that made that statement. Basically, if there weren't a god, mankind would create one, and I can't for the life of
Right.
me remember who exactly that thinker was. But I mean, there's a valid point there.
And you actually so there's certain things that you see from psychology that are like there's certain aspects of human beings where we repeat the same symbols, we repeat the same ideas, we repeat these things. And I'm not talking like fourth turning type stuff. I'm talking about like the reason that you can take an American child at birth and throw them over in China and they will speak Chinese and have a Chinese accent is because our brain has all of these base layers of code that have been evolved over billions of years to create the complexity that is the human brain. But in order to do that, it has to have a base set of patterns and a base set of capabilities, and those evolutionary patterns exist no matter what. So if you locked a child, and I think there was a couple cases where this happened, for abusive parents, they'd lock babies into an attic, and the babies will still develop a language. It'll be its own independent language, right? You see things like the swastika. As much as that's used as a Nazi symbol, it also shows up, I think, in the Hopi Indians and a couple other places, because that symbol is just like a ghost in the machine. It's part of our base code that runs, and religion is the same way, right?
Well, you also see the cross as well. I mean, these are symbols that they repeat
Yes.
and they echo throughout the human timeline.
Right, and we have a tendency to grab onto those specific symbols, and carry them forward. That's a little bit less true with stuff like the fist, which is more directly tied to communism and is always like a subversive symbol. But
Yeah,
basic simple
especially the
shapes are
palm out fist.
basic principles of religion are pretty consistent. If you look at the central tenets of them, most religions tend to overlap in some way, shape, or form. Most of them are not like radically different. Um, and so when we turned around and secularism killed God, as it may be, and I speak as an atheist, so I'm all for killing God. But when secularism killed God, the majority of people couldn't handle it, and we invented wokeism.
Yeah, there were a
And
lot
that
of people
has
that
provided
needed
a right.
they needed either a very soft letdown or they needed a new crutch,
I
and
don't
they were provided with a new crutch.
I don't think that's accurate. I think that religion provides purpose, right? Uh,
Well,
it,
I'm
I
in this case, I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm just generalizing.
I got it, but I think the best way to look at it is you watch Rick and Morty.
I don't consume any media, but I did watch the first 2 seasons, so I am quite familiar.
Did you see the one where he built the robot that fetches him butter?
I don't think so. No.
So it's a little skit at the beginning of one of them. You should go look it up. He's just Rick is for those who aren't familiar with the show. Rick is a mega smart scientist. He has all of the capabilities in the world, and he's just like a screwdriver away from basically inventing time machines. And he does invent time machines and whatever else to facilitate his things. It's a cartoon. It's all fantasy. The amount of time that you would have to spend to build all the things that he technically has would be impractical, but
To say the least.
To say the least. So but he does build stupid things to amuse himself, and he builds stupid things because he doesn't feel like doing inane tasks. And one of these inane tasks that he didn't want to do was build butter. So he built a small sentient robot that had little chisel hands. And he turns this thing on, and it's completely sentient, and it looks up to him and says, "What is my purpose?" And the robot, Rick turns to him and says, "You pass butter." So the robot passes him butter, and the robot pauses for a moment and looks up to Rick and says, "What is my purpose?" And Rick just looks at the robot and says, "Your purpose is to pass butter. That's what you do." The robot looks at its hands, it freaks out, and says, "Oh my God." And I think that's kind of what we see, right? Is divinity provides us purpose.
Oh, indeed. Absolutely. It gives you something to aim for, and it's
right.
as any kind of secular person, you have to find your own light at the end of the tunnel, shall we say?
Right.
And if you don't, you can end up in the dark, aimless. And that's a very strong analogy for exactly where a lot of these folks are.
And that's I think what we're really looking at when we start talking about the woke movement is a whole bunch of people who don't know how to find their own purpose. They need to be handed a purpose. Going back to that 75% of people,
well, that's also too where we're seeing a large resurgence in Christianity in the West is now as well. Which
really?
We really are. Yeah, we are seeing something of a Christian renaissance. Which, honestly, I find Christians to be some of the most tolerable people. So I genuinely don't have a problem with that. Like as religious fundamentalists go, I'll basically take a Christian or any of the Zen philosophies any day.
Yep.
Because fundamentalist Zen is that's great. Those people are cool. They're just like, yeah, I won't do violence even to a fly. So,
yep.
I mean, I've got zero issue with that. That's cool with me. I mean, I will, but you do you. But that's kind of another philosophical anchor, albatross, if you will.
I think Christianity or all of these other religions took to some people who were relatively, I don't want to say simple-minded, but directionless, and gave them purpose.
Shall we say uncomplicated individuals?
Well, and that's not to say these people aren't smart. By the way, like smart people,
No, it is just to say that they are, in particular, unnuanced people. What you see is truly what you get.
Yes, and these people, they need direction. Religion used to provide that direction, and when it was gone, it's a whole bunch of people standing up, looking at the sky, holding out their hands and saying, "What is my purpose?" And the woke showed up and said, "Your purpose is to fight for social justice." And that became their cause and their new religion. And it's got the same tenets of like ancient religions. You watch people whip themselves. You see concepts like original sin. A lot of these things that in more evolved religions like modern day Christianity, Judaism, even I think most of the Hindu religions, they started wiping out these components of their religions because it wasn't useful. Like those religions were alive, living religions. They evolved over time. Wokeism is essentially going back to these, sects. And I don't mean sex as in like the fun part of sex. I mean sex as in sect.
Yeah,
like
religious
sectarian.
sects.
Right. And they're going through a lot of these old practices that you haven't seen since the Dark Ages. And that's, I mean, you see Jon Stewart, and we're reminded of where we were when we decided that we didn't need God anymore. And now seeing him, we're kind of reminded of, hey, maybe we should bring that motherfucker back. I don't need him, but, you know, clearly some other people do.
Yeah, a lot of people are having a lot of trouble walking without crutches, you know?
Yep.
And some people, yeah, I mean, they can walk without crutches, but god damn it, they won't. They just will not do it.
Well, it's hard, right? If you want to talk about defining your own life purpose, it's really, really
That
hard.
is actually, I mean, it's not a big ask. It's like losing weight. It's like you just don't eat, which,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
it is that simple, but that simple thing is sadly not so simple. It's like, yeah, you've got to make your own purpose. That statement alone, that's simple. It
Yep.
really is. It's that in black and white. But making that purpose is a task in and of itself.
Right, and that's
It
I
doesn't
think, the
have
thing
to be. But it's
I
going to
don't
be
know.
hard for a person not to make it that way, because it takes a particular dedication to really have
think,
that single-mindedness.
I think when you start talking about like what is my purpose, and I think you're on a roll there with the just stop fucking eating so much is like all you have to do to lose weight. I think at the end of the day, it's the same kind of complexity of the question, which is, you know, who am I? What am I defined as? And I had a concept back in college, right? Um, uh, it was good versus evil. My philosophy was there is no good and there is no evil, and I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me. And a lot of people get really upset by that, but you say, you know, there is no anti-squirrel, which is another one of my internet pseudonyms is the anti-squirrel, because at the end of the day, good and evil, like who we are tends to be defined by what we are not rather than who we are, and it is much harder to define yourself independent of other things than it is to define yourself as dependent or a subset of something else. Which is one of the reasons why identity politics works.
Well, it really is that path to the dark side.
Yep.
It really is.
But I mean, that's what it is.
And see, one of the things I find most bothersome about that is there are good tools there that could be useful to good ends, but they are often just abused, even by the ones who might have at one point had some sort of otherwise altruistic notion. They've just kind of fallen far from their purpose.
Well, I think as soon as you start defining yourself as a series of characteristics rather than independent of characteristics, and as soon as you start defining other people as determined by specific characteristics they hold, I think that you will always run into this problem, because you can't divorce. If you like, I hate to, because it sounds like bragging, but it's not. I consider myself to be independent of, most notions. There isn't a real easy box to fit me in, because I'm into just about everything. And I get involved in all this stuff. I research this stuff. I build, I create, I destroy, and then I walk away from it and go do something completely different. My knowledge base is very large because of this. Craig is in a similar boat. So when you start turning around, for me, I don't have a specific thing I can identify myself with, and that is my own identity. The lack of identity is my identity. But it becomes very hard to deal with people when you're trying to define them solely as what they are rather than fit them in a box. It's kind of like stereotypes have a purpose, and it's a way that we can manage things because they are generally true. Whereas asking people to come up with their own definition of themselves that doesn't involve, it doesn't involve an external characteristic is very hard. Like how do you so for me, I have a list of accomplishments. Like I can go to my resume. I've got a whole host of skills.
So if I were to say to you, how are you could answer that question.
I can answer that question.
And that,
right? And I
can
answer
and let
my
me,
evolution.
as a matter of fact, I know we don't have the largest audience, but it is actually growing, which is kind of dope. But above and beyond that, to those of you listening, be able to answer that question. It may never be asked of you.
Right.
And it might be the kind of question that you have to ask yourself so that you're comfortable when you meet your own pearly gates, if you like. But you need to be able to answer, who are you? At
Yep.
least to yourself, if no one
And
else.
it's a really hard question. Like, I mean, I have a whole host of training and accomplishments and research and all these other things that I've done, and I can define myself by my accomplishments. But what do you do for people who aren't particularly accomplished? How do they define themselves? What characteristics are they going to use to apply to themselves to make up who, Joe, how is John Smith different than any other John Smith? And that's I think a serious problem, and I think that's what religion used to solve, right? You were a good Christian. That's what you were, right?
Well, I
And
mean, even
now,
if we want to break that down even farther, it was the fact that it was John Smith that told you who that person was. Now, you're
right,
not going to meet that many John Smiths that are out there making, um, shoes for horses or, forging a knife.
right,
Most of your John Smiths are going to be in some sort of office job or doing any number of other mundane things. And you might meet yourself a Bill Cooper. I can just about guarantee you that Cooper, he's not really building any barrels. I
right,
can I can just about say without a doubt. So,
right.
these things, they just become something else and lose their value over time, and so something new kind of comes in to take the place, as you say, in this case, the good Christian man.
Right. And you start talking about the good Christian man, and that was your accomplishment. Like for people who were not necessarily skilled, who did not engage in any training, who didn't build anything, they didn't create anything, they didn't destroy anything. They were a good Christian because they that was how they identified. And now we're in a position where we took that away, and now what are you left with? You have a whole bunch of people who can't define themselves by their accomplishments, and they can't define themselves by their religion, so they're going to define themselves by the next observable thing. It's going to be your oh, what is that? What's that movie where the guy sits there and he like tells a great story about what a great criminal he is, and then gets immunity, and he's just like whatever's in the room. What's
Hmm.
that called?
I
Kaiser,
think I know what you're
Kaiser
talking.
Soze.
Oh,
Kaiser
oh,
Soze.
oh, yeah.
The
Usual
Kaiser
suspects.
Soze. Right. Your woke or Kaiser Sozes. That's what they are. They aren't real people for all intents and purposes because their entire definition is based on because they aren't embracing an external characteristic. All of their definition of who and what they are is defined by their inherent characteristics, and that's why I think we have the problem that we do.
Well, that's absolutely one vector. That is absolutely one vector of assault on basically what our modern world is and what kind of holds it together.
You know what I think we should do? We should take all of these motherfuckers. We should have a coming of age ceremony. That's what we need.
Oh yeah, no, there's absolutely any number of people who never grew out of childhood, and that is one.
Yep.
That is, and possibly an even larger vector of the assault on our modernity.
Like if you turned around and you said you have to go on a vision quest for a month where you're not allowed to participate in society, you have to go off in the wilderness and survive, right? Like, and you were taught the basic skills, but you did that. I think that would fulfill the thing without requiring a god. Because I
Yeah.
think that
Well,
people
people
would
there
have
was
defined themselves
there
from
was
their
in
experience.
society at one point a well, to put it simply, some have said we need a war. We're kind of past that, and we've got a lot of infrastructure that would be destroyed by that, so it's kind of a bad principle. So what we need to do is we need to go to space
Well,
because
we need to
that
be on.
that will make men of boys, and that's what we need. We need that transition from childhood to adulthood. Not just men to boys, girls into women, so that girls don't
See,
want to become boys and boys don't want to become girls, so that they can
yeah.
come to a place where they can fulfill a role that will not only fulfill them but also fulfill society,
I
which
don't know if
isn't
space will do it.
necessarily you don't have to be a cog in the machine, because there is enough space in the machine for cogs that make it run and cogs that just spin freely. But
Well,
the thing
and
is, you
that's
can't be
that's
kind
kind
of
of the
spinning
thing is I
against the
don't
machine, or you're going to get ground to dust or
right.
tear it all down.
I don't know if space would be the vessel for that. Like, I understand what you're saying, but
I
I
mean,
think the problem
it's a
is
new
that
frontier.
space is going to be a new frontier. But there's only going to be a handful of people that start to access it. And yes, while I would agree that that kind of experience would be a defining experience for them and themselves, there's going to be a lot of people who never go. Even if it was fully accessible, there's a lot of people who won't go.
That's true. That is true. I mean, I'll be honest. I want a small place on Mars, even if it's this fucking cube where they only serve me bugs. I may have it on Mars. I'm not
I
giving up
thought
this
about it.
place. Just saying. I'll just rent this out while I go and visit, and then I'll come
Got it.
back here and have like actual human food. But
I thought about it, and unless I knew that I could return, I would not go.
oh yeah, no, the return trip is like that's the deal breaker. So that's got to be an option.
Like you see Elon Musk out there now. He's definitely pump and dumping. Like, seriously, what the fuck? I can't believe that he's doing as much, like, how he's being explicit and outright on his pump and dumps. Um,
As you do, I guess.
yeah,
I mean, he's basically just been given carte blanche kind of anymore, which it's very odd. It's just
it
very odd.
is.
And the thing about it is, I mean, there isn't. I've not run across any decent rational explanations other than maybe he's just got friends.
For the pump and dumping stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for all the shit that's just being allowed to slide.
I don't know. I don't know what it is. I mean, the thing is that I could also see it being this is a way to bankroll Tesla because Tesla is not profitable,
No,
right?
no, even still.
There's no way for it to be profitable. Like, I've seen people do the calculations out, and as much as there's a whole lot of people who are
Yeah,
buying into the dream, it's not technically a viable.
yeah. I think a
um
lot of the money that makes Tesla work is money that's come in from like I don't want to say subsidies, but like if you go to buy an electric vehicle, you get like a big discount, but that discount isn't actually a discount. It's paid out from like some government grant or government fund to the car maker. And then there's a
you
lot of
you
systems like that Tesla is making use of to kind of fund their operations
yes.
as well.
Yeah,
Where a General
it's
Motors
not.
kind of doesn't.
So Tesla sells a car and Tesla gets a portion of it, but there are also discounts that are provided to the people who buy the car. Like, the government gives stuff all the way around. So it actually, back when Teslas were 80,000 bucks a piece, they were actually the reason you saw all these celebrities buying them was not just because they had the money, but also because it was actually a good investment for them. Right. By the time you were done with the Tesla, it was a very reasonably priced car.
Well, also
Um,
you look at where these people are located. You're going to be looking at most of these people being in California. So that's like basically a double dip because California is going to
right.
give you all that
Eh,
much more on
eh,
top.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is Tesla was claiming a ton of credits from California and the feds, despite not meeting the technical criteria for the credits they received. There was a big hubbub about it, and then California kind of buried it because basically they came to the realization that if they pursued this with Tesla, it would they would kind of expose the program as not working for anyone,
House
right?
of
And
cards, as it
so
were.
yeah, yeah, it's one of those you pull that thread and it ends up in an uncomfortable place, which is why they did their what was it their quote unquote battery change because they had to meet a specific criteria that you could refuel it within 5 minutes in order to continue to get the credit because that was one of the criterias. But the way they did this was they drove it into a specific station. Nobody had access to it. Nobody could see it. There was an NDA for every single person who worked on the thing, and we all had to just trust that the battery was actually changed in that period of time.
Oh, the
Right? Like,
battery was changed. I can just about guarantee you that. Quick changed
uh,
even.
how you guarantee that?
Well, I mean, just from my basic understanding, I'm sure they. Well, I imagine there was some level of fuckery akin to Volkswagen and how they beat the emission stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, the thing is, they could have made a specialty car for the event
Oh,
that
I
didn't
almost
have all the
undoubtedly.
rest of the other stuff. Yeah, and so that one was capable of doing it just to demonstrate the whole concept. But then there were no more. They didn't build any of those fast charging, 5 minute swap out your battery stations.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
Um,
They might have used something with an experimental uh, battery compound too that actually is literally quite capable of doing that. But
right,
something that's going to be able to do that is going to degrade very fast, or it's not going to hold it very long. It's going to be like a supercapacitor. So it's like,
right.
yeah, you can charge it right up and it'll do the job, but it's going to dissipate in no time.
So my understanding, yeah, is see capacitors are really interesting.
Oh, they really,
I
really are. As
I
a matter of
they
fact,
really
on the best
are.
modern supercapacitors, you can basically eliminate a battery on a car. You can have a
And that's
tiny, tiny little battery just to keep the thing charged, and that's going to be
yep.
adequate if you've got an alternator system.
And that's kind of that's one of the things. So if you actually, oddly enough, going back to my favorite game is Eve, and that is what you run on your ships.
Oh,
So
really?
your energy system, yeah. So you have your shields and you have your armor and you have the other stuff, but the resource that you have to manage is your capacitor, right? So they did not do batteries in spaceships. You have a capacitor. It has a specific charge rate that is dependent. Like it's got the. I think I would be willing to bet it's got your actual capacitor charging equation associated with it. So it's got a peak charge point versus a non-peak charge point and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And then depletion points and all that other stuff. Your goal is to get cap stable, where the rate of charge of the capacitor is equal to the rate of consumption of that capacitor, and
So your
depending on your ship
incoming and
that you're
outgoing are
loading.
going to be balanced.
Right. And the actual the actual ship design and how you spec your ship and what you put on it will actually change where in your capacitor level you have. And so that is actually your margin for various things like electronic warfare and various other things, which is a very interesting concept. I know it's a video game, but if you actually do the research, like I've said before, batteries are a terrible technology. They're incredibly inefficient, and they will break down over time, which means that every single battery that you get, especially on
Well,
a
that's
scale
actually
up
a
thing, is
really good
planned
note
obsolescence.
regarding supercapacitors and modern supercapacitors, especially.
Right.
They're incredibly resilient. I mean, we're
They
talking
they are.
hundreds of thousands of cycles at a
Well,
minimum.
the key difference between a capacitor and a battery is attempting to store uh, electrons in a physical material and exchange it with another material through a circuit. So I take one material and I stack a whole bunch of extra electrons into that material, and then I have a membrane that separates it from the negative side, and I basically deplete it that way. Right, is I do the exchange by closing the circuit, and it transfers in a direct current fashion. Capacitors store their energy in the magnetic field between two charged plates, which means that you can make your capacitors you can theoretically make your capacitors of thinner, lighter materials and not suffer dielectric breakdown like you do with batteries, because it's not stored in the actual physical materials itself. It's stored in the actual magnetic field between the two materials.
And an interesting thing about capacitors and capacitor technology. I mean, that could be used in concert with some of the low output but incredibly long life technologies like crystal batteries and solid state batteries.
Hmm.
That could actually make something like that legitimately viable, because those kind of technologies, they're never going to put out high volts fast. They just won't do it. That's not what they can do. They like chemically, thermodynamically, they just aren't capable. So that would be, possibly a really reasonable bridge to that gap, and could give you very, very long-lived power supplies for kind of any consumer electronic, theoretically.
Well, it could. I mean, the primary reason why we use batteries instead of capacitors is the batteries are technically smaller right now, because capacitor technology is very, very early on in its infancy. But if you sit there and you start talking about places where they're starting to implement capacitors in consumer technology, it has already happened. I think the Note 10 was one of the first cell phones where we started seeing capacitor. Now, it wasn't in the actual phone itself because, again, your battery is your battery, but the S Pen, which is the little pen that you draw and work with, they were able to give that a capacitor charge, which allowed you to operate it as an air remote.
Something like that
associated
with
the
one of the
nose.
remote charging capabilities, that's a very good way to make something that would otherwise be somewhat disposable and have to be somewhat
Well,
disposable, or either be completely repairable or be disposable. It's like you have to make that choice. You can actually make something like that into basically a semi-durable good.
I mean, they did, right? Like, but the key advantage is that you go and you take your S Pen out and it's usable as a remote for 30 minutes, and then you pop it back into the phone, and in
What, a minute
30 seconds,
maybe?
in 30 seconds to a minute, it's got another 30 minutes of charge on it,
Yeah,
right?
and
That's
as a
the
matter of
amazing
fact,
part.
there's some free designs for capacitor-based LED pocket flashlights that are amazing. I mean, you spin the thing up for 15 seconds and you get 30 minutes of 400 lumens.
Yep.
I mean,
You don't
simple
you
as that.
don't face you don't face the same level of like of heat loss from them. They're a much better technology. And we going back to Tesla for a moment, like I have railed against batteries when it comes to solar systems and all the other stuff. I don't know if capacitors would successfully do that because you're still talking about trying to balance a huge load, which is very difficult to do. But when you start talking about Tesla and batteries, it's kind of a surprise that they're pursuing this technology while claiming to be a quote unquote green company, because when you actually evaluate
Yeah, there's
the
kind of no
number.
way to make any of the batteries that our modern world runs on in any kind of green way. I mean,
Right.
you
Well,
can, but it
it's
is incredibly cost prohibitive because
it's
it works
it's
with
not
some
just
very
that.
noxious chemicals.
It's not just the chemicals and the processing. Like, even if you could figure that portion out, the other issue that you have is it comes from very rare materials. And so one of the reasons why Tesla is not profitable, despite the fact that they charge an arm and a leg for their cars, is when you start talking about the design overhead, they have to hit a certain number of cars produced per year in order to do that. I think it's like 500,000 cars or something like that, and they are only able to produce half of that solely due to the constraints on how quickly you can process the raw materials. And this is stuff that's not found very common. Like
There's a
the
reason why
reason.
it's called rare earth metals. They are
Right.
legitimately
Well,
rare.
rare earths aren't as rare as people think. Like, we know where they are, but the stuff that goes into batteries is a specific portion of those rare earth materials, and there's only a handful of deposits on the planet that are rich enough for us to actually extract, and those tend to be done essentially by hand. I think they hand dig out stuff like the cobalt and all the other shit.
Hence why we should be
And
mining asteroids.
right, they dig this out by hand in Africa, and that's the only place where it's profitable to do. Somehow we have people that we pay basically slave wages to go sit there and rummage around in the dirt with their bare hands, and despite all of the technology that all of these other countries have,
Oh, did I lose
dirt and
you?
soil and stuff. Oh, sorry about that. I'm like 5 feet away from my receiver for my shitty headset.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Yep, yep. So but yeah, the when you start talking about the rare earths that it requires to make batteries, it's like these rare deposits that are only in poor countries, and the only reason it's profitable to mine them is because we're paying, Africans slave wages or literal slavery to go extract this material. Like, we will literally run out of battery material before Tesla will make a profit, because there's physically not that much material on the planet.
Yeah, that is to say, at least where we are right now. But then that's why I
Right.
say we need to be, out there mining asteroids, because if we look up, there's effectively infinite resources. And if we're at an infinite resources
Oh,
stage, we can do a lot more interesting things, and we can fuck around more because we've got more to fuck around with, that those things that would
true.
otherwise be finite.
But at the same time, when we start talking about rare earths, they're still going to be proportionally
Oh yeah, they
not
won't be so
particularly
common, but I
prevalent,
mean,
right?
once we take the cap off, I mean,
Yes.
yeah, we'll have to work a little bit harder to get some of those, but they'll be there as opposed to
Yep.
their peak oil stops being a thing, essentially. There is no peak oil. I mean, there is, obviously. I'm just making an analogy here. But, that kind of, that changes the game. It's not to say that it moves us out of a scarcity economy into a post-scarcity economy, but it fundamentally changes the nature of the way that we would view and use capitalism, and probably to the better.
I mean, I think the thing is that the thing that people misunderstand with capitalism is there's only one valuable resource that you have, and that is your time. That is the only resource that is finite and limited, and that is what everybody pays for, right? In some manner or form. And I don't think capitalism will change that all that much. We might get bigger machines, we might get larger scale, we might get new equipment, but at the end of the day, we will always be trading for units of time. And where capitalism is kind of broken nowadays is now you have institutions where that you have financial stuff where that they're no longer trading for units of time. They're trading for artificial numbers that have no direct meaning.
Well, I mean, it's kind of fiat currency on fiat currency, really.
I know.
I mean, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
we find ourselves in the most interesting of times. You could certainly say that.
Indeed.
You do. So I don't like to close these things on a dark note. So let me just go over the stuff real quick, because I think I've got something that's not horrible news. Aside from the fact that, no, I don't. Other than that, we can actually point at a lab in Wuhan as probably pretty sure it came from there, and that we're all being lied to, and we can all say that. So
Yep.
I guess it's not a good ending, but it's some closure and some confirmation of the things that we kind of all knew. So I guess we can have a little bit of what would you say? Not Schadenfreude, but a little bit of I told you so, I guess. A little bit. But it's not really no real comfort in it, right?
I don't know. My hope is that there's a lot of people who are watching what's going on, and they're going to learn from their mistakes. That's all I can hope for.
Indeed. Well, we can say one thing. A lot of people who otherwise wouldn't know a lot of very, very important things have learned things that they were never meant to know in the first place, and there is a great value to be drawn from that.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, as I've said it about any one of the end of these, be safe out there. Keep your powder dry and be ready for anything to happen. And, of course, I cannot guarantee that Steve here is going to be back on Twitter or anything, but you can look him up at Ratman720, and you can try and hit him up. It might work, it might not, but you can hit up Craig or myself. Craig at CraigBob99, most places. Me at that fake guy Dan, also most places. And we can get any message across, or if you've got any ideas, show stuff, guest ideas, anything, hit any of us up. And, beyond that, it's good having you here. Spread the word. Tell folks to tune in and check it out, because I think we put on a pretty good show here. And from what I understand, people seem to take a few things away. So I'd like to keep doing that. So if you can help, that'd be really dope. And I guess with that, then we'll just kind of sign off. So, sir, it's been a pleasure. And I guess we'll talk to everybody hopefully in less than another week.
Yes, I apologize to all of our fans, our one fan or whatever it is. In any case, the reason the show is late this week is me. I am very sorry. Like I said, I came in from Vegas over the weekend, and I am.
And boy, are his arms tired.
They are indeed. They are indeed, and I'm still peeling too, which is just awful.
Well, Baz Luhrmann, there's a strong message in that. Wear sunscreen.
But yep, we will be back at our normal bat time and our normal bat place hopefully this weekend. And I do apologize to our friends, family, and fans.
So yeah, thanks for being there. Give us all a follow. I can guarantee I'll at least interact with you. Craig probably too. But either way, everybody out there, be well, stay safe, and stay safe because there very well might be somebody looking out for you. So it's not paranoia if they're actually out there. So hey, keep that in mind. Go with my love.